Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Was Aizawa's Unexpected Son? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. There were many things that Aizawa Shoyuta, or any hero for that matter, were prepared for when on the field. Surprise attacks, surprising quirks, hostage situations, etc. You had to be prepared for things going for the worse at any moment, and a hero couldn't just be a one-trick pony who could do nothing but rely on their quirk, in Aizawa's opinion anyway. Those heroes were just asking for trouble. Then there were stranger things. Things you didn't even think could happen, but when they came you just had to deal with it. At the age of 21, with his experience in the field soon being 3 years, Aizawa had already seen his share of weird shit. For example, there was that one time when an elderly lady had completely ignored the villain attack going in a store and had just continued shopping like it was completely normal for 3 heroes to be fighting in the store and throwing shit around, knocking shelves down left and right. The store was in literal chaos, and in the midst of it all that granny just carried on. Always an inch away from harm's way but never getting hurt. The store had given the granny all the products for free since there wasn't any employers to charge her, or any working registers for that matter. The granny never told them what her quirk was. Aizawa was convinced that it had something to do with luck or not giving if, resulting in that no one could F with her. That granny remained as an enigma and had for long taken the mantle of weirdest shit ever seen in his hero work. There were other weird cases, but this one tops them all. They had gotten a lead on a villain hideout. It was rumored to harbor many wanted criminals, and so they had raided it with multiple heroes. The intel had been correct. In a seemingly normal, but also shady as F, bar had been an active villain hideout, complete with a dozen or so villains, weapons, drags and other illegal things that were all concentrated to one bar that acted as a front. As the fighting had reached its conclusion, a few villains escaping in the chaos but most arrested, they finally had time to search the place more closely, getting police and detectives with them to gather all the evidence from the villainous activities going on. They had finally found a hidden entrance from under a rug behind the bar. It certainly was a pretty solid hiding place if not for the complete search of the place, but Aizawa still found it incredibly cliché. In case there was any villains still hiding down there, a couple of heroes went down first. Aizawa, the hero Midnight and the hero Best Jeanist jumped through the open trapdoor and passed the steep ladder down ready for all surprises. At the bottom of the trapdoor, they found a short dimly lit hallway with only 4 doors. As Midnight kept watch, Best Jeanist and Aizawa simultaneously checked the opposing first 2 doors. Aizawa's had a pretty normal-looking storage room safe for the fact that the stored things were weapons. There were no villains inside. Best Jeanist found his room to be some kind of an operating room, down to the operating table, instruments and nauseatingly sterile feeling the room gave off. At least it wasn't covered in blood or something like that. The heroes gave each other looks after revealing the rooms before moving on to the last 2 doors. They took the same positions once again. Midnight keeping watch, Best Jeanist taking the door next to the operating room and Aizawa taking the one next to the storage room. Now Aizawa expected something standard, in a villainous way, you know. Not that finding a completely normal room was that out of the question. But finding something like this was so far from anything Aizawa could have ever imagined. For a moment after opening the door and switching on the light in the room, Aizawa was convinced he had entered a completely different reality. Because in what reality could you find a FING nursery in a villain hideout? Complete with the baby blue walls, toys, a changing table, a crib and most shocking of all, a baby. All clear. My room was just empty save for the fact that one wall was a one-way glass to the operating room. How's the last room Eraserhead? Aizawa heard Best Jeanist's voice come from the hallway. A problem, Aizawa said with his deadpan voice, in a staring match with the infant sitting innocently in the crib and staring at him with those 2 big curious green eyes. A problem? Best Jeanist sounded on guard now. Something dangerous? I doubt it's dangerous, Aizawa answered, reaching into the crib to lift the baby in his arms, but definitely a problem. What are you talking of? Midnight abruptly cut off as she saw Aizawa walking out holding a baby in his arms. Oh. Oh, seems about right. You found a baby? Aizawa nodded. There's a nursery and everything. Best Jeanist and Midnight shared a look before they both rushed to check. Aizawa turned his frown to the baby sitting quietly in his arms. The baby turned to watch him again. Problem child, Aizawa stated. The green-haired child tilted his head a little in question and made a small, confused noise. He was surprisingly calm since Aizawa was a stranger and not so long ago there had been loud fighting going on upstairs. Never thought I would see something like that in a villain hideout. Midnight stated dazedly as she and Best Jeanist came out of the nursery once again. I must admit that was most unexpected, Best Jeanist said as well. So, what do we do with him? Aizawa considered the baby in his arms for a moment. Well, we need to inform the others of this development first. Best Jeanist and Midnight agreed and so they headed for the steep stairs. To use his hands to climb them, Aizawa used his capture gear to wrap the baby to his chest in a makeshift baby carrier. The rest of the heroes and police officers were no less surprised when Aizawa emerged while carrying a baby. He shortly explained the discovered rooms and the fact that the fourth one was a nursery, from where he had found the baby. But whose is it? Asked the hero present Mike with a dumbfounded voice. As far as we are aware, no recent kidnappings have been reported, stated the young chief of the police force, Kenji Tsuragami. You don't mean, started present Mike slightly horrified. Seeing as the infant has been found in an active villain hideout, it is reasonable to assume, Tsuragami started, that he's a child of a villain. Aizawa ended. Everybody turned to look at him and, simultaneously, to the baby who was now deeply asleep on Aizawa's chest. Tightly secured in his capture gear and sleeping peacefully with his one chubby cheek pressed to Aizawa's chest. This poses the problem of what to really do with him now. We don't know whose baby it is, so we can't return him to his parents if he has civilian parents out there looking for him. The child cannot be handed over to any of the villains arrested, of course. And since the child is a living being, and a child, it is not even fathomable that he could be included as evidence even if he was found here. There's also the fact that he could be a child of a villain, so bringing him to Child Protective Services could pose a huge danger to the child and whomever is taking care of him. So, where do we place him? We can take care of him. See now, Aizawa has, even in his young years of 21, mastered the art of a resting poker face. One which was not easily cracked. Hearing his current roommate, or more accurately boyfriend, Hisashi Yamada state that they, presuming him and Aizawa both, would take on a baby was one of the rare things that managed to break Aizawa's poker face. Aizawa turned abruptly to Yamada and through gritted teeth whispered, What? What? Why not? Aizawa was so dumbfounded that he couldn't form a coherent verbal response, instead just giving a general hand gesture of, What the hell? Are you crazy? We need to get more information and conduct a proper investigation into the matter. Meanwhile, the baby needs a place to stay. He seems all right with you. We can easily take care of him until a more permanent solution is found. I just happen to be the one to find him. That hardly qualifies me to take care of him. Aizawa exclaimed in as shocked and loud way as Aizawa could. Which really wasn't that loud, in fact, it was really close to his normal voice. But Yamada knew the difference. That actually sounds like a solid plan. Until further notice, the baby needs a place to stay. I see no reason why it couldn't be you too. You are both capable, sensible heroes who can take care of him and protect him. Chief Tsuragami confirmed and Aizawa turned his slightly betrayed gaze to him. Are you all right with that Eraserhead? There was a couple of moments of silence as Aizawa was given time to think about it. He racked his brain quickly through the pros and cons of the request. In a way, there wasn't anything too bad in the con list, except changing diapers, a screaming unfamiliar child, a potential villain coming to hunt them down for kind of kidnapping their child, so no big problems whatsoever. Finally, Aizawa turned to look at the baby peacefully resting on his chest and sighed. Fine. We'll take care of the bugger. Possum. Everything is settled then. For now. Aizawa turned his suspicious gaze to the dog-headed chief. Did he? We need to make sure all the evidence is gathered. Eraserhead, Present Mike, it's best that you head on and make any adjustments you need to do for the child. Midnight, best Genist. As of now all the villains are arrested, but it could still be best that you stay while Officer Toyomitsu gathers the rest of the evidence. All the addressed people nodded in agreement. Taimitsu Taishiro, who would be later known as Pro-Hero Fat Gum, gave a thumbs up. And I trust that everybody present understand the dire need to keep this a secret. All mentions of the child must be kept under a strict confidentiality agreement. There can't be any pop-ups in the news about this. Boof. Wait, was that another? Everybody nodded again. Fantastic. You're dismissed. Aizawa was still busy suspiciously squinting at the chief because he definitely was making puns when Yamada walked over to him. So, you ready to take our new baby home? Aizawa had been prepared for a lot of things going into a villain hideout bust. Temporarily adopting a baby was not one of them. Sitting in a car with a sleeping baby wrapped on his chest, Aizawa still couldn't shake the feeling that nothing made sense. How did he end up in this situation? I'm too young to be a father. The slight upside was that despite his inner turmoil, Aizawa had been able to recollect his poker face and outwardly seemed like he had everything under his control and nothing could faze him. It didn't erase the absurdity of the situation, however. Like when they arrived at their small apartment with only 2 rooms, their bedroom and the living room, and Shoyuta realized that now they would be living with a baby. Where the heck were they going to place the baby? What the heck were they going to do with the baby? What did the baby need? What did he? So, right now, we don't have anything, so you stay here and I'll do a quick run into the store. Aizawa wanted to protest. He wasn't sure he was ready to be alone with the baby. One which needed a name. They couldn't just keep calling it a baby, right? They could worry about that later. Baby was fine for now. Helpless to protest, Aizawa watched as Yamada changed to civilian clothes and rushed back out. Leaving Aizawa standing in their living room, confused as to what to do next. At least the baby was quiet. And still sleeping peacefully. Was it okay for it to be sleeping so long? Wasn't there some appropriate nap times and stuff so that babies would sleep in correct times of the day? How old was this baby anyway? Did it still need BRST milk? Were men, they couldn't produce BRST milk. There were replacements, wasn't there? Of course there was. Stop panicking. Aizawa sighed and finally decided to sit down. They would figure it out. Everything would work out, somehow. Hizashi had younger siblings and everything, he knew about this stuff already. They would be competent enough to keep the baby alive for. It couldn't take more than 1 or 2 weeks to sort this out. It was manageable. The house was quiet and peaceful. The softly sleeping baby could have been one indication, but suddenly Shoyuta felt incredibly tired. A usual feat after coming home from work. He figured it would be a good idea to just take it easy for a while. And so, that was how Hizashi found him sleeping on the sofa with the baby when he finally came home. And then Shoyuta woke up when he heard a camera shutter and saw the flash through his eyelids. Instantly he sat up and pointed an accusing finger along with his gaze at Hizashi. What do you think you're doing? You can't blame me. You two were adorable. I had to take a picture. No, erase it, Aizawa ordered sternly. Shuta. No, I don't wanna. I'm literally holding a baby and yet the biggest baby in this room is you. Shuta, that's mean. Erase the photo. No. Yes. No. You, what is that? Shoyuta cut off and now pointed accusingly at the numerous bags left at the entryway. Supplies. Why is there so much? Hizashi was happy for the distraction since it made Shoyuta forget about the photo, now safely stored in multiple places in his phone. He proudly made his way to the bags and picked them up to bring to the kitchen table. Babies need a lot of stuff. I just got the basics. He stated. Why do I doubt that? I got baby formula, baby food, baby clothes, pacifiers, nursing bottles, diapers, cleaning wipes, a crib. A crib? Well, yeah, a baby needs a crib. Yes, but I also got a stroller, some toys. Do we really need all this? I thought about buying a baby carrier, but seeing as your capture gear works so well as one, I figured that we don't need one right away. We can see later if we need one. Hizashi. Yeah. You do remember that we are only keeping this baby temporarily, right? Aizawa asked warily. Yes, of course. But you would be surprised how much stuff baby needs even in a short PRD of time. Aizawa let his eyes roam all the stuff already spread over the table. I am. It's been a while since we started the raid. Presumably he hasn't gotten any food during or after it, and there's no way of knowing when was the last time he ate. I think we should wake him up and feed him. Aizawa glanced at the sleeping baby. You sure that's wise? Wasn't there a rule about waking sleeping babies and whatnot? So far it had been so quiet and calm. Aizawa really didn't care to change things. Well, he's probably going to cry and that really can't be helped. Infants are usually fed up to 12 times a day. I wonder how old. 12 times. How do you even know all this stuff? Well, I used to take care of my siblings. And did some brief Googling in the store. Googling? It's a reliable source. Shoyuta doubted that the first page of Google was 100% reliable, more like sponsored. Right. Anyway, you wake him up while I heat up some formula. I'm not sure if he has been eating solids yet, so the safest route is to try and feed him some formula first. Shoyuta glared at Hizashi. Why was waking the baby his job? He didn't want to disturb the peace. But he figured it couldn't be helped. A lot of what Hizashi had said made sense. But Aizawa wasn't completely sure as to what was the best way to wake a sleeping baby. God, it just sounded like such a terrible idea. So, he carefully extracted his capture gear away from the baby, now holding him in his arms and trying to gently prop him awake. And luckily enough it seemed to be working as the baby's eyes started to blink carefully open along with more stirring. As Aizawa watched, the baby's face scrunched up and he prepared for the worse. Only for the silence to continue. Confused, Aizawa watched as the baby's eyes were slightly glistening with tears, yet he didn't let out a peep. Strange, suspicious. He didn't cry. That's... Yamada started. Weird. I guess some babies are just like that. Some of them just never cry, Yamada suggested uncertainly. Shoyuta raised an unimpressed eyebrow but didn't protest further. So, oh God, I forgot a high chair. Do we really need a high chair? Well, he can't sit in a regular chair. Yeah, but we can make do for the little while that we have him. We can easily hold him while feeding him. Here, see? Aizawa said and demonstrated by shifting the baby in his arms to what seemed like a more suitable feeding position, and then he grabbed the nursing bottle from Hizashi. He was just about to put the pacifier end to the baby's mouth when... No. Wait. Hizashi yelled, and Shoyuta was glad that he didn't drop the baby by how loud and sudden it was. What's wrong? Are you crazy? I almost dropped the baby. We have to make sure it's the correct temperature. Couldn't you have tested it before? I forgot with the whole feeding chair fiasco. Fiasco? Anyway, it says at the box that the best way is to put some of it on your arm to make sure it's the right temperature. Fine. There, you happy now? Aizawa asked after dropping a few drops of formula from the bottle on his arm. Does it burn? No. Is it too cold? No, I don't think so. Then I guess it's all right, continue. Aizawa sighed and resumed with the put the bottle into the baby's mouth and feed it. Simple enough, right? He couldn't mess that up, right? Except he did. Since the baby refused to put the pacifier into his mouth. Squirming and avoiding it as Shoyuta tried to catch his mouth. He's squirming. He won't take it. You are holding him wrong. Support him more and bring him into a more upwards position. Shoyuta sighed. He really was too tired to constantly stress over whether the baby was okay or not. If the baby had this and that thing it would need. Was he doing this thing wrong? Again, for a moment he doubted their capabilities to keep this baby alive. His worries were for naught though, since by following Hizashi's directions, he was able to correct the baby's position enough to get him to take the pacifier and, well, there he goes. Drinking the formula like a man dying from thirst. Guess he was really hungry. Aizawa only grunted as a reply. Focusing on keeping the baby in an ideal position and keeping the bottle upright even as the baby was grabbing it with its chubby little hands. The bottle was empty in no time. You think we should feed him another bottle? I don't think it could hurt, Hizashi stated, taking the bottle and going off to prepare another dose. This time Hizashi tested the temperature himself before handing it over to Shoyuta. Repeating the process, the baby started with as much enthusiasm as before but halfway through started to wind down until he finally stopped drinking with like only third of the formula left in the bottle. The little listener seems to be all filled up. Now you gotta burp him. Burp him? The concept wasn't completely unfamiliar, but Aizawa wasn't that thrilled to do it. Who knows what else might come up with it? Yeah, burp him. Just lift him up and pat him gently on the back. Shoyuta considered this and considered the baby in his arms, until reaching the conclusion that so far he had done most of the workload. It's fair to say that now should be Hizashi's turn, isn't it? So, with little warning, Shoyuta was pushing the baby to Hizashi's arms. You can do it. I need a break. Oh, okay. Hizashi said, quickly trying to adjust with having a baby in his arms. Here we go. Hey little listener. How's it going? Are you ready to be burped? You are? You are. Aizawa observed over his shoulder on his way towards the bathroom how Hizashi talked and made faces at the baby before expertly holding the baby against his shoulder and patting his back until a loud burp could be heard. He looked so natural. Quite honestly, Shoyuta was a little envious. Compared to Hizashi, he knew nothing about babies. And now they had one. As Shoyuta enjoyed his brief private moment reliving himself in the bathroom after hours being in contact with people constantly, he pondered how usually when you were getting a baby, you got approximately a 9-month waiting PRD to sort everything out and actually learn, or something, all the stuff you needed to know. They got nothing. And what? Now they should just get by? It was crazy. As Shoyuta returned to the living room, it was to the sight of Hizashi sitting on the couch with the baby, gently rocking him with soft words of a lullaby falling from his lips. You are already putting him back to sleep? Babies sleep a lot. He started to get sleepy after that huge. You did, didn't you? Who ate so well? You did. Hizashi softly baby talked to the green head in a whisper. But he just woke up. Is he going to sleep at all when the night comes? He will probably poop before night, and we will change him and then get to bed. Yeah, he probably won't sleep through the whole night. This being a new place for him and all. We will probably get to wake up to crying at least a couple times. You sure about that? He hasn't cried once since I found him. Even babies that are shy about crying cry when they are upset enough. I'm sure this piece is only temporary. Unfortunately. Nietzsche. Shoyuta didn't really protest, but he was skeptical. To him, the fact that the baby hadn't cried once seemed just way too abnormal to be normal. There just might be something bigger at work here. I really can't keep referring to him as the baby in my head. We need to decide something to call him, Shoyuta stated. Like a name? Hizashi asked. Maybe. Nickname, something, anything. How about Itsuki? Like my grandfather. Itsuki? No. What, why not? Doesn't it mean timber tree? It's a little on the nose, don't you think? And anyways, it's much too personal. Well then you come up with a name, Mr. I'm too good for my boyfriend's grandfather's name. How about PC, short for problem child? Shoyuta suggested. We can't call him that. That's mean. And it's much too close to BS, and we are not calling our child bullshit. Hizashi exclaimed, seemingly scandalized. PC and BS are nothing alike, like maybe PC and BC for bullshit child are a little alike, but... Shoyuta tried to protest in a grunt but then rolled his eyes and caved in. Ugh, fine. How about Izuku? Izuku? Why Izuku? I don't know. It's a nice name. It can do the job. Aizawa was not explaining that it was one of the names he had sometimes pictured as his possible future children's names. He was just using it for convenience's sake. Izuku. I like it. Izuku. Hizashi softly tried and considered the sleeping baby in his arms, as if to check whether it would fit or not. I think it fits him. Let's call him Izuku. Shoyuta carefully looked as Hizashi smiled softly at the baby. His eyes soft and the name Izuku even softer on his lips in the small peaceful bubble they had accidentally created around them. The whole picture of them two sitting closely next to each other with a baby Izuku. It was much too domestic. Dangerously domestic. Just remember, Hisashi. We can't go getting too emotionally attached to Izuku. There's no telling how long we will be taking care of him, and we have to say goodbye at some point. Hisashi didn't turn his gaze to Shoyuta, keeping it at the peacefully sleeping baby with much more melancholy in it now. Yeah, I know. We won't. Shoyuta searched Hisashi for a sign of something. When he didn't find it, he got up, Hisashi finally turning to look at him. I better go through all the stuff you bought. We gotta build the crib and everything before night. I'll take care of Izuku. As Shoyuta walked over to the numerous bags piled onto their kitchen table, he wondered about the heavy feeling on his chest and whether he should be worried of it or not. Apart from the panic of, oh my god? How long has Izuku been in that diaper? Why haven't we changed him? See, he's fine, his butt is all smooth and soft how it should be, no worries. The rest of the night went smoothly. They assembled the crib, meaning Shoyuta assembled the crib. He was not letting Hisashi near tools. Besides, somebody had to hold Izuku. Izuku woke up at one point but was quite content to sit in Hisashi's lap while Hisashi shook a toy at his little chubby hand's reach. Shoyuta distractedly switched between TV channels but was paying more attention to Hisashi and Izuku than the TV. The news report about the villain hideout bust managed to capture his attention briefly, but it was all pretty standard stuff. It mentioned the heroes involved, excluding him, Eraserhead being an underground hero and all, and police and even some of the dangerous villains captured. Most important of all, it didn't mention anything related to Izuku. They discussed briefly about schedules so that at least one of them was always with Izuku. They could make it work since Eraserhead worked mostly at night while Present Mike was out on the front lines during the day. They even had times that both of them could be home with Izuku. And then it was already time to feed Izuku again and get ready to sleep. As Shoyuta was brushing his teeth, Hisashi fed Izuku. Then they changed, Shoyuta taking Izuku and getting the job to change his diaper. See, they were learning. While Hisashi brushed his teeth. It was all pretty routine aside from the fact that they had inserted a baby into the mix. Then Shoyuta was already holding Izuku in his arms, wondering what the best way would be to put Izuku to sleep on purpose. Before, Izuku had just happened to fall asleep and they had been all right with it. Now they had to do it purposely. And right now, Izuku seemed to be wide awake. As Shoyuta tried to awkwardly rock him, Izuku just kept staring at him with wide green eyes. Shoyuta scowled at him when a few minutes of rocking weren't doing the trick. A snort made him raise his gaze to Hisashi, who was trying to hide his amusement. What are you trying to do? Intimidate him to sleep? Shoyuta growled, exasperated. He's not sleepy at all. He's not even closing his eyes. You've barely tried for even 2 minutes. Besides, that's not how to get a child to sleep. Shoyuta looked confused from Hisashi to Izuku and back. I'm rocking him. What more does it take? Let's start with us, Hisashi said as he clicked on the lamp next to the bed further from the crib and then went and turned off the overhead light. And next, now the baby had been snatched from Shuta's arms and was being placed on the bed over a baby cloth, Hisashi expertly wrapping Izuku in it like a green vegetable burrito. And finally, Hisashi lifted Izuku into a gentle cradle in his arms and popped a pacifier into his mouth. Now at least the basics are covered, I think. He will probably get sleepy in no time. If you say so, Shoyuta muttered as he made his way to his side of the double bed and climbed under the covers. Hisashi gently settled next to Shoyuta and softly hummed a lullaby-sounding tune at Izuku, who did seem at least a little sleepier now, though he was still staring at them with those big green eyes of his. I think we have done pretty well taking care of Izuku, Hisashi said in a whisper. Now it was hush-hush time so that Izuku would fall asleep. The brat is alive at least, Shoyuta conceded while lazily scrolling with his phone. There wasn't much to check though. Both his social and social media life was almost non-existent. Shoyuta noticed Hisashi glaring at him disapprovingly and he smirked. Okay, we did fine. I'm going to sleep now, don't wake me. And with that, Shoyuta placed his phone to charge on his bedside table and got more properly under the covers before turning away from the light of Hisashi's side bed light. Shoyuta could be a pretty light sleeper at times, but at least he had mastered the skill of falling asleep instantly. He was out like a light. The next time he woke up, it was after his phone's wake-up alarm had vibrated once, and he was already reaching for it to turn it off before anyone else had a chance to even notice it. The room was covered in cool darkness, and Shoyuta squinted at the too bright phone screen for the time. It showed 2 a.m. It took Shoyuta a couple of seconds before he could gather enough motivation to get up. But finally, he did, and he slowly and quietly sat up on the bed before getting up. It took only a couple steps to reach the crib placed next to the wall, and there, what do you know, Aizawa's hunch had been right. There, lying quietly with their pacifier dropped, lied Izuku with glistening eyes but not letting out a peep. Those big green eyes moved to him, and Shoyuta was concerned when he could almost swear that he saw fear in them. Shoo! He softly shushed Izuku as he carefully reached into the crib and tried as carefully as possible to lift Izuku up and cradle him softly in his arms. It's okay. Shoyuta glanced at the bed where Hisashi was sleeping peacefully and decided to move to the other room to make sure that they wouldn't disturb him. He made sure to open and close the door as quietly as he could. Shoyuta and Izuku settled on the living room couch. Shoyuta wasn't exactly sure as to what else to do apart from holding Izuku. It was enough to comfort him, right? I wonder what your deal with crying is. Shoyuta softly spoke to Izuku. I don't know why you hold back when you seem like you want to cry, but just know this. It's safe to cry with us. You don't have to be afraid. We will take care of you. The only response Shoyuta could get was for Izuku to keep staring up at him. So, whenever you are ready, just let the tears come. In a fit of affection? Shoyuta found himself placing a soft kiss on top of Izuku's head, much like he remembered his mother doing to him when he was little. We won't let anything bad to get to you ever again, I promise. It took a while, but eventually Izuku fell back to sleep and Shoyuta returned him to his crib and went back to sleep himself. The next time his alarm woke him up at 5 a.m. and got up to check for Izuku, he was peacefully asleep, and Shoyuta returned to bed. Hisashi was a morning person, and he would take care of Izuku once he woke up. Shoyuta was left to sleep peacefully as long as his body allowed. Which meant that a little over 10, Shoyuta finally emerged from the bedroom groggy and grumbling. He headed for the coffee straight away, not registering anything on the way there. The black gold was bitter and so very wonderful on his tongue as it warmly streamed down his throat. It was only after 3 sips of coffee that he finally bothered to take note of his surroundings. And that was when he saw Hisashi playing with blocks on the floor with Izuku. Or Hisashi was playing with blocks and Izuku seemed to just stare. Shoyuta chuckled at his coffee. It wasn't that they had had many problems at any point, but Shoyuta was still surprised just how well taking care of Izuku integrated into their lives. They just clicked, and it became a routine for them instantly. Changing Izuku, feeding Izuku, being with Izuku. They went through it all smoothly as F-. It was probably also due to the fact that Izuku was the easiest baby ever. While it concerned Shoyuta that Izuku didn't cry, it also made taking care of him stupidly easy. It did also mean that Shoyuta and Hisashi had to train quickly to notice Izuku's tells if something is wrong, and then address it immediately. Shoyuta liked to think that his skills in playing poker helped at noticing these times. But after 5 days of having Izuku, juggling hero work and taking care of Izuku, it was also becoming clear that Izuku was. Well, Hisashi had went on a rampage, Googling everything about taking care of babies in general and of babies' development, and from there it became clear that Izuku was a little behind. Izuku could sit and hold up his head, that suggested that he was at least 7 to 9 months old. But at 7 to 9 months Izuku should also be grasping objects more, smiling at people, babbling, laughing, imitating sounds, even crawling. But Izuku wasn't doing really any of these things. He was an extremely quiet baby and mostly just sat around and stared intently at his surroundings. It had also become a nightly routine for Shoyuta to set up at least 2 alarms during the night to check up on Izuku since he didn't cry, and Shoyuta hated the idea of Izuku just lying there for, possibly, hours alone and upset. And so, he routinely got up to check and, unfortunately, often also found Izuku to be awake and upset. They made efforts, together with Hisashi, to try and get Izuku to get used to them and, well, maybe open up a little. If babies could do that, they made sure to always be gentle and supporting with him, trying to make sure that whenever something was bothering Izuku, he was hungry, he needed changing, he needed a nap, he needed to be held, they would address these as soon as possible. And of course, talking. Hizashi seemed to be much better at it than Shoyuta, what with Shoyuta not doing baby talk. While Hizashi babbled and cooed and made faces at Izuku and seemed to talk to Izuku almost constantly the longer Izuku had been with them, Shoyuta mostly just talked at Izuku normally, making snarky remarks about Hizashi or observations about Izuku himself. Generally, Shoyuta didn't really change his way of speaking apart from adults when addressing Izuku. Izuku remained quiet. It was the 6th night of having Izuku that Shoyuta, once again, woke up to check Izuku. And to his absolutely no surprise, he found Izuku awake and tears gleaming in his eyes. And so gently he once again reached over to lift Izuku into his arms and comfort him against his shoulder. It's okay. I'm here for you, Izuku. What did shock Shoyuta was the fact that after a couple of moments he heard Izuku first sniffling more audibly and then Izuku cried. It was literally the first time that Shoyuta had heard Izuku cry, and to say he was well surprised was an understatement. He shook it away quickly though and focused into comforting Izuku. He was crying. And it was that cry too that you would catalog as a baby crying. It was 100% normal sounding baby crying. What's happening? Shoyuta? Hizashi asked, alarmed as finally Izuku's cries woke even him. Izuku? She's crying? Shoyuta decided to walk over and sit next to Hizashi, still carefully comforting Izuku and petting his back in long soft strokes. Hizashi too placed one of his hands gently onto Izuku's head to slide his soft green curls. I guess he finally felt safe enough to do so. After Izuku's first time crying, it was pretty much like a switch had been flipped. All those milestones Izuku hadn't been showing before? It was almost shocking how quickly he started to reach them. The morning after the cry, Izuku smiled for the first time and Hizashi was so overjoyed that he could barely control his quirk. He did, thankfully. God knows that loud of a voice would probably upset Izuku. What he couldn't control, however, was having some common decency. Okay, not even necessarily common decency, but more like rules to not annoy Aizawa, which included not waking him up in a god-awful early hour of the morning by violently shaking him. Shoyuta was almost ready to strangle Hizashi for that, but he was placated by Hizashi dragging him into the kitchen to see as Hizashi goaded Izuku to smile again. He had to admit it was cute. And seeing Izuku smile made something warm and soft and happy bubble in his chest. Not that he would admit it. The morning was spent with Hizashi trying to get as many pictures as possible of a smiling Izuku and Shoyuta refusing to be in the photos, and occasionally failing due to Hizashi's annoyingly consistent and relentless begging. While Hizashi was out working, Shoyuta didn't really notice anything that different about Izuku. Usually they just hung out, watching the news. Aizawa finishing last night's hero reports with Izuku strapped onto his chest facing the computer. Izuku did seem to be more curious in Aizawa's hero scarf when sitting in his lap, grabbing it and examining it carefully. Shoyuta let him and didn't think too much of it. It was at dinner time when Hizashi had once again joined them that they heard the first experimental babbling from Izuku. It was brief and didn't sound like anything sensible, and no matter how Hizashi tried, he couldn't get Izuku to do it on camera. That night, instead of waking up to his regularly scheduled wake-up alarm, Shoyuta woke up 11 minutes before it to Izuku's crying. He scrambled quickly out of bed to go gently scoop up Izuku in his arms to comfort him. He distractedly thought about how some babies were taught to put themselves to sleep by crying, or how some of them weren't comforted when they were crying about nothing. He couldn't picture himself doing that anytime soon, if ever. It wasn't that he judged those parents. There must be some reasons for that. But Izuku barely felt comfortable enough to cry at all. He could never just ignore him. Hizashi startled awake once again, but Shoyuta told him to just continue sleeping. Hizashi was so out of it that he mumbled something incoherent while already back halfway to sleep, and Shoyuta moved into the living room so that Izuku's cries wouldn't bother him too much. Izuku calmed down eventually and then fell right back to sleep with Shuta's gentle lulling. The next morning was another one of Hizashi waking him up way too early. This time he jumped onto him in his excitement, dragging Shoyuta out of the bed by his feet, and then continuing to drag him across their apartment to the kitchen where Izuku stared at his two guardians in confusion from the highchair. Shoyuta, you have to see this. You have to see this. Oh God, just wait till you see it. I already saw Izuku smile last morning. It was magical. But you don't have to wake me up for it every morning. Shoyuta grumbled from the floor where he was still lying on his back after being dragged there. No, it's even better. Oh God, you're not gonna believe it. Shoyuta sighed and decided to just endure this. Getting up from the floor and then looking at Hizashi expectantly. What is it? What did Izuku do? Izuku, look at me, do that thing you did before, remember? When Papa did this. Hizashi continued to do some noise resembling something like this, baleagagalala, with his chin and tongue lax and shaking his head at Izuku, who just continued to stare at him in confusion. Shoyuta raised an unimpressed eyebrow. Remember Izuku? Just like this balalagala, Hizashi kept shaking his head like an idiot. Izuku was still not doing anything, and Shoyuta was about to give up and at least go get some coffee for himself because he doubted he could really fall back to sleep anymore when Izuku imitated Hizashi, then continued to smile this 100,000-watt smile and then finally let out this joyous happy giggle. Izuku seemed to finally find this action of shaking his head like an idiot enjoyable, and he did it again, resulting in more giggles. Hizashi was so happy about this that he was almost jumping up and down. Wait, no. He literally was jumping up and down in joy before he leaned back to Izuku's level to do the weird face thing with Izuku. More happy cancer-curing giggles followed from both Hizashi and Izuku. Shoyuta was pretty much frozen in place, staring at the scene in front of him in bewilderment. Not really knowing how to process it. But God, how did it made him feel happy, enough so that a small rebellious smile managed to escape onto his lips. Curse Hizashi and Izuku for being so cute that they made him smile on 8 a.m. in the FNG morning. He was breaking character for God's sake. See? Isn't that amazing? Izuku baghalalala. Izuku again followed Hizashi's idiotic example and giggled some more. Oh, Izuku, you are so cute. Hizashi exclaimed while taking Izuku into his arms by his armpits and lifting him up briefly into the air like the little lion was lifted in Lion King's start. Shoyuta shaked his head at his boyfriend's ridiculousness, but that rebellious smile was still on his lips. Who's the cutest? Who's the cutest? Is it Izuku? Is it you? It is. Izuku is the cutest. Hizashi baby talked and then continued to blow a raspberry on Izuku's cheek, which just made Izuku wild with giggles. It was a happy morning. Since they got Izuku, Shoyuta had been coming home from work way earlier than he used to. This night, though, there had been some difficulties and he arrived way later than he had during the last week or so. Their routine most of the time was that Hizashi looked after Izuku at night and put him to bed. Shoyuta would come at least before 12 a.m., which was actually very early for him. Before Izuku he would do even longer hours, but he tried to cut them back a little now. When Shoyuta usually got home, he would find Izuku and Hizashi sleeping, and he could get a few hours of sleep before waking up to check up on Izuku. That night when Shoyuta came back at 3 a.m., he came back to Hizashi trying to console almost hysterically crying Izuku. He was dead tired himself, and he would have given almost anything to just be able to go to sleep right away, but it seemed that he had to push a little longer. How's it going? Shoyuta whispered into Hizashi's ear as he came from behind him to wrap his arms around his distressed boyfriend. He noticed that Hizashi startled briefly before relaxing into his arms. We have been up for almost an hour. I can't get Izuku to calm down and I feel so tired and I'm not sure if I'm just making it worse or not when I can't keep myself calm. God, I've never tried to comfort Izuku when he's crying. I guess I suck at it, Hizashi told dejected. It's okay. You're doing fine. How about you give Izuku to me for a while and you sit down for a moment, okay? Shoyuta said, giving Hizashi a gentle kiss to the cheek. Hizashi sighed briefly in relief and then gently gave off Izuku to Shuta's arms. I'm so sorry, Shoyuta. I know you must be really tired after work and all. It's okay. Everything's okay. Isn't it, Izuku? Shoyuta gently rocked Izuku a little and tried to make sure that he was as comfortably as he could be in his arms. He leaned down to give a kiss on top of Izuku's soft green curls. He headed towards Hisashi to sit down next to him on the sofa. "You did great," he said once more and again gave Hisashi a kiss. Hisashi smiled at him tiredly. "I love you. I'm really glad that you're back." "I love you too," Shoyuta murmured back. It was just after this that Izuku's cries and sobs quieted a little, and he was left sniffling and looking up at them with those big bright eyes of his, still full of tears. Hisashi chuckled a little. "See? You are much better at this than I am," he said. "Don't be silly. I wouldn't even have been able to keep him alive and healthy without you. He just needed the both of us." Hisashi smiled softly at Shoyuta. "We are pretty great at this parenting together, aren't we?" Shoyuta frowns worriedly, turning his gaze from Hisashi to Izuku. Something in his chest ached. Something scared. "Yeah, we are, aren't we?" Luckily for both of them, nobody was in a hurry to go anywhere the next morning. And so, quite unusually for Hisashi, they actually slept in. The next morning Shoyuta found himself actually cuddling with Hisashi when he woke up, quite an unusual feat since he usually got up before him. It was nice. Even though it was also hot and at least one arm of Shuta's was completely numb, and he could really use a shower. Hisashi let out a satisfied hum when he woke up and continued to stretch like a cat, letting out a satisfyingly sounding pop from his back. He settled quickly back into trapping Shoyuta in his arms while he nuzzled his nose into his neck. "Good morning, my prince," Hisashi mumbles sleepily. "Morning, sunshine," Shoyuta smirks. They lie there for a while just enjoying the peace and relaxedness of it. Shuta's fingers start to wander slowly and lightly down Hisashi's side, toying with the little bit of skin that peeks out from the crumbled-up t-shirt Hisashi wears and his boxers. He can feel Hisashi smiling into his neck and him moving his body slightly, pressing even more into his body. "Shoyuta," Hisashi whispers and then gently traps his lips with his own. Both of their hands now traveling more up and down their bodies. Bodies shifting and lips moving against each other. And things are getting more heated up when Shoyuta abruptly pulls away from Hisashi and turns to look at the crib, and what Izuku. There Izuku sits happily staring at them through the bars of the crib. Anything that had gotten heated up just before was quickly deflating. Shoyuta sighed as his body slumped on the bed. Hisashi sighed beside him, also having noticed their little audience. "Yeah, not much that happening with Izuku in the room, is there?" he stated. "Nope," Shoyuta answered and thought, "I'm too young to be cock-blocked by having a baby." The next milestone Izuku reached was crawling. A happy development at first, worrisome shortly after. Now it meant that if you placed Izuku onto the floor, he would crawl. And if you placed Izuku onto the floor and turned around for a second, he would disappear. Which in turn meant lots of heart attacks to both Hisashi and Shoyuta. Basically, it just meant they had to keep a sharper eye on Izuku so it wouldn't be a problem. It was more like the opposite of a problem, if you watched Izuku like a hawk, since Izuku was this quick little smiling and giggling bugger every time he really got going with the crawling. It made both really happy seeing Izuku being happy, healthy, and normal. There was one instance when Shoyuta felt really tired and waking up to Izuku's crying made him think, for a second, that he broke the perfect baby. Since Izuku not crying meant you didn't wake up to a baby crying. Then just after he thought that he felt guilty and horrible because he knew how much better Izuku was now. He knew that Izuku felt like he trusted them. He knew that Izuku was happier. He knew that Izuku was so much better now. And it all had started with him feeling safe enough with them to cry out. And so, he gave himself a mental kick to the butt and got up to comfort Izuku. With all these happy changes, time seemed to just fly by with taking care of Izuku, feeding Izuku, now playing with Izuku, seeing Izuku smile and hearing him laugh and Hisashi taking like a billion photos of it, and Shoyuta even sneaking like a couple for himself. And before they even knew it, they were reaching the 2-week point mark of them taking care of Izuku. Hisashi had gotten back from work like an hour before. Shoyuta had a really late night shift today, so they had a lot of time together, all three of them, though Izuku was napping at the moment. It was then that the doorbell rang for their apartment. Not thinking much of it, Shoyuta went to open the door. And shortly after he felt a cold hard stone fall into the pit of his stomach. Chief Tsuragami. Shoyuta? Who's at the door? Oh. Shoyuta heard Hisashi yell out and he turned around to see a crestfallen look on Hisashi's face, who had already seen Chief Tsuragami standing at the doorway. Shoyuta sends him a sympathetic look before turning back to the chief. Chief, he greeted in a more polite tone, what brings you here? Go ahead, come in. I think we should talk inside. Thank you. Very much, Tsuragami answered as he stepped inside and started shrugging off his coat. Hisashi, Shoyuta turned to look at his boyfriend, still standing almost frozen in place. How about you make some coffee and tea for us? Right? Sure, Hisashi agreed, but his voice was quiet and sad, only increasing Shuta's worried status. Shoyuta was glad that Tsuragami didn't bother making meaningless small talk to fill the heavy silence that surrounded them now. Shoyuta waited for him as he carefully took off his jacket and shoes, and then they walked into the kitchen and took seats on the opposite sides of the table, Shoyuta on the side that Hisashi was making coffee with slightly shaking hands. So, Chief Tsuragami, what brings you here? I came here to, Tsuragami started. You can't take him. Hisashi exclaimed and interrupted Tsuragami. He flipped around from the coffee maker to stare at Tsuragami with desperate and scared eyes. Yamada! Shoyuta scolded. No. You can't just. Izuku is, Hisashi tried to stutter through his explanations. Izuku's is happy. He trusts us and he feels safe and he has improved so much. You can't just take him away. That would put Izuku back to the start if not further. Yamada, calm down, let's just hear what Chief Tsuragami has to say. No. We love Izuku. I know we do. Yamada, we have only had him for 2 weeks. But we still love him. It doesn't matter that we have only had him for 2 weeks. I love him and I know you love him too. Don't try to deny it. Hisashi objected. Shoyuta sighed and let his head droop. There was a moment of silence as both Hisashi and Tsuragami waited for his response. Finally, Shoyuta turned properly to face Tsuragami. Hisashi is right. We do love Izuku. And since we got him, we have noticed that Izuku has learned to trust and feel safe with us. He has improved so much, and if you are here to tell us that you're going to take him away, then I'm afraid that we have a problem, Shota stated, gravely staring Tsuragami down. Tsuragami assessed him carefully. Well, I guess that's going to make my job that much easier, he said. And Shoyuta heard Hisashi gasp behind him. First of all, I'm sorry for not checking up on you these past 2 weeks. We have been really busy at the station. We ran. Izuku's? We are calling the baby Izuku, that's right, Shoyuta answered Tsuragami's silent question. Ah yes, so we ran Izuku's DNA through the system, but we couldn't find any possible parental matches. As of now, we still don't know who Izuku's biological parents are. We also did a wider search of any kidnapping reports from the last year and no one matching Izuku's looks and age was found. Shoyuta felt Hisashi stepping closer behind him and place a hand on his shoulder, squeezing briefly. Shoyuta placed his own hand on top of Hisashi's to calm him. Furthermore, the fact remains that there's a high possibility that Izuku is a child of a villain, seeing where we found. But if we were to find the biological parents, they most probably would be facing prosecution and prison, meaning that Izuku could not be handed over to them. How Izuku was taken care of before is unknown, but seeing the villain's general lifestyle, it couldn't really be stated that that kind of an environment could be considered healthy for a child in the long run. Which brings us to the fact that Izuku needs a new home. There is protocols and systems placed to finding orphan children homes, but as we can't be sure just who might be still hunting Izuku and what Izuku's quirk might be once he reaches the age. If we pause and reflect, it seems that placing him in normal adoption process could be potentially dangerous. Hearing that you too want to adopt Izuku? At this, Shoyuta raised his gaze to Hisashi and they exchanged a meaningful look and a nod. We want to adopt Izuku. I guess that confirms it then. Truly the best place to leave Izuku seems to be here. With 2 loving parents to take care of him and 2 capable heroes to protect him. There is some paperwork. Tsuragami leaned down to lift a briefcase into his lap and open it to take out a stack of papers and place them to the table. First off, the adoption papers, Tsuragami said and handed them over the table. We also must forge a birth certificate for Izuku. You should take Izuku to a doctor for a checkup and well. I guess I'll leave you to figure out all the other details. Shoyuta was looking over the adoption paper. I guess all of this will be done kind of under the radar. There's a possibility that a dangerous villain could be hunting for Izuku. It would be best that we would make that as difficult as possible. Shoyuta nodded as Hizashi took a seat next to him to look through the papers himself. So, we just fill these out now. And Izuku is ours? Hizashi asked. Yes, that's right. Shoyuta and Hizashi shared a look and smiled at each other, both of them feeling relief from the news. This insistent tight feeling that Shoyuta hadn't even fully realized that he had been feeling lately was finally released. By the time they had filled out the adoption paper for Aizawa Izuku, Hizashi had happy tears in his eyes, and he surged in to hug Shoyuta, soon sobbing with happiness. He's ours now. Izuku is ours, he whispered. Yes, he is, Shoyuta confirmed and hugged Hizashi tighter, burying his smile into Hizashi's neck. So, you get to keep this copy and I'll file the other one forward to make it official. Congratulations to you too, I guess, Tsuragami said, and they turned towards him. Thank you, Chief Tsuragami, Hizashi said. It was my pleasure, just keep the pup safe. Hizashi chuckled, we will. It was then that they heard a small inquiring babble from the bedroom that both Hizashi and Shoyuta noticed because of their practiced ear at anything Izuku-related and that Tsuragami noticed because of his sharper hearing. Hizashi hurried to go get Izuku and soon returned with him in his arms. Izuku stared in curiosity at Tsuragami since he was a new person after only seeing Shoyuta and Hizashi these past 2 weeks. Izuku didn't seem scared by Tsuragami, more like really curious, and the chief smiled at him, waving his fingers at Izuku. Hey there, little one, take care for now, okay? After that, Tsuragami excused himself, placating the offers of the completely forgotten coffee and claiming that he still had police work to get to. Once Tsuragami had finally left the apartment, Shoyuta got back over to Hizashi and Izuku, smiling at the both of them. Hear that, Izuku? Hizashi asked, showing the baby the adoption paper. You're ours now. Shoyuta chuckled, giving Hizashi a kiss on the lips and Izuku a kiss on the head. I can't believe we did this. I guess we are dads now. I can't believe that I'm a dad now, Shoyuta thought. God, I'm so happy to be one. Once again, Shoyuta felt that this huge bomb had been dropped into his life. A happy bomb. A bomb he wouldn't give up even over his own dead body. There was Hizashi after all, but a bomb nonetheless. Because taking care of a baby temporarily, even unexpectedly, you could manage, you could make short-term arrangements to make it work. Taking care of a baby for good, though, that needed a lot of adjustments and arrangements. First, there was making sure Izuku was healthy and had all his necessary shots, and just generally figuring out whether there was anything to worry about. Since Izuku wasn't genetically theirs and they didn't know who his biological parents are, and they didn't know how well Izuku had been treated, they basically knew nothing of Izuku medically. And so, they were quick to start with that and take him to the doctor, where they did some blood sample tests and took some of Izuku's DNA to figure out any looming inherited diseases. They found out that Izuku's blood type was O negative, that he was missing a couple important shots, which they fixed, and that generally Izuku was a healthy and happy about 10-month-old baby, which made them decide that Izuku's birthday would be July 15th. They also decided to take X-rays of Izuku's foot, which in turn revealed that Izuku didn't have the extra toe joint and therefore he had a really high chance of getting a quirk. Shoyuta felt just a little weird and uncomfortable getting all of this information about Izuku this way, but it was also a necessary evil. Considering Izuku's origins, they should prepare themselves for anything. That taken care of, the next order of business was figuring out what kindergarten to put Izuku in. And what primary school and what secondary school. Apparently some people figured these things out before the child was even born and they just got Izuku, and he was already almost a year old. That's just the thing, they had to figure out everything so quickly. They didn't have a time where they were thinking about having a baby, they didn't have a time where they were trying to get a baby. There was no PR'nCY or adopting shenanigans. Izuku just dropped into their lives out of nowhere and they fell in love with him, and now they had to adapt to so much new stuff. At least the good thing about schools was that it wasn't like Izuku needed to go into one tomorrow, or something. They still had time. Izuku was still quite quiet, and they had a lot of milestones to cover before Shoyuta felt comfortable enough to give Izuku to some stranger's care. They also had to really balance out their work schedules and figure out what to do if neither of them could be there to watch Izuku. Maybe their friends or family could help. Oh God. We haven't told anyone that we adopted a baby, Shoyuta said in dawning realization. What are you talking about? Of course I have. Hizashi said casually, too casually to be saying a loaded sentence like that. What? Who have you told? Shoyuta exclaimed. Well, my family of course, and your mom and our friends. Namuri has been begging to come see Izuku again for days now. Your mother said something about coming soon and I'm not entirely sure what she said after that. I'm pretty sure I heard your name. I had to change Izuku's diaper then and I was distracted. You told my mother? When? Well, I told her that we were taking care of a baby at first, and then I told that we adopted Izuku once we made it official. Right after we made it official? Yeah, after you went to work. Oh no, that meant? You mean you told her a week ago? Yeah. And she promised to come over as soon as she can too. Hizashi replied happily. That BSRD. Shoyuta barely had any time to stare at Hizashi in bewilderment. He had the sudden urge to shake Hizashi violently for not giving him a heads up at all. It's been a week. Knowing her, his mother might turn up any second now. And it was at that moment that the doorbell rang. Shoyuta wanted to hope for the best. But he also knew in his heart that it was hopeless. It would be exactly who he feared it would be. Mrs. Aizawa greeted her son with a gentle slap at the back of his head. You adopted a baby and didn't tell me? Sart, the mother. Shoyuta replied obediently. Not a second after he heard Hizashi exclaiming from behind him, Mrs. Aizawa. You came. Of course, I did, dear, she replied as she stepped over to greet Hizashi with a hug and a short kiss to the cheek. Shoyuta snorted. Him you greet properly? Well, he was the one who bothered to tell me about my grandson. Speaking of whom, where is the little bugger? I didn't travel 5 hours just to see you two lovebirds. Love you too, Mom, Shoyuta sighed. Mrs. Aizawa smirked and leaned in to give Shota a kiss to the cheek too as he was passing by to lead her to the bedroom where Izuku was taking his nap. As they arrived quietly, they found Izuku still taking his nap of the day snuggled in his comforts. Even being as quiet as they could be, it still didn't take long for Izuku to stir and open his sleepy eyes. They watched as little by little Izuku woke up and finally focused on the two figures watching him over the edge of the crib. Shoyuta reached carefully over to lift the sleep-tousled boy into his arms. Izuku was wearing light green baby one-piece with the words, Photoshop not needed. In Hizashi's words it was, hilarious, and brought out his eyes and hair. Izuku, having noticed the new person, was staring intently at Mama Aizawa. Shoyuta was grateful that she didn't reach for Izuku and try to take him into her arms right away. Izuku didn't seem afraid, but his eyes screamed, curious and a little shocked, and Shoyuta didn't want to make him uncomfortable by placing him into what was essentially a stranger's arms. Hey there, little one. Mom greeted, trying to lower herself a little lower so she would be more on Izuku's level. Mom, this is Izuku. Izuku, meet your granny. Shoyuta introduced them, although it would kind of go a little over Izuku's understanding. Hearing his voice, Izuku raised his gaze to his dad, still clutching his shirt in his chubby little hands. Oh God, Granny. That makes me feel so old, Mom said and shook her head, lifting her hand to her cheek. You still kick butt, Mother. That made her throw her head back as this big joyous laugh bubbled out of her chest. You silly kiss butt. How about you offer your mother some food? They moved into the kitchen where Hizashi was already one step ahead of them, preparing food for them. Shoyuta stayed back as his mother joined Hizashi. Izuku's grip was still tight around his shirt and Shoyuta was happy to hold him as long as he wanted. The conversation flowed naturally. Mrs. Aizawa was so familiar with Hizashi that she practically treated him like her own son. She shared what was currently going on in her life while Hisashi talked about theirs, Shoyuta occasionally adding in stuff. The kitchen was filled with domestic sounds of making food, easy conversation, and laughter. It didn't take long for Shoyuta to notice Izuku relaxing in his arms as he studied the kitchen with his big round eyes. As Mama Aizawa laughed again, that big loud laugh of hers, Izuku raised his gaze to Shoyuta and giggled a little himself. Mama Aizawa seemed to notice this but didn't comment on it. It was about when they were setting up the table that she finally dropped the bomb they had been kind of expecting. "So, where exactly did you get Izuku from?" Shoyuta and Hisashi shared a look, having a brief silent conversation through that alone. She was family. She was mom. This wasn't something they could just tell everyone, they had to come up with a cover story, but not now. Izuku was found from a villain base we raided 3 weeks ago. We took him in at first to look after him until it could be figured out a more permanent place for him, Shoyuta started. And it's now here. We love Izuku and so we adopted him, Hisashi ended. I see, Mama Aizawa said with a thoughtful expression, and you don't know who his biological parents are? We don't, Shoyuta said. And it doesn't matter, Hisashi continued. Mama smiled gently and squeezed Hisashi's hand. Of course, dear. I know that. Izuku seems just lovely, you two will be great parents for him. Hisashi smiled at her and moved on to eating. It was delicious. Izuku was also fed. They had moved on to baby food from the formula shortly after getting him since Izuku wasn't exactly infant anymore and apparently that was okay. All in all, the night was great. Mama even got Izuku to smile and giggle and he seemed alright when she took him in his arms. Not that Izuku had ever really been upset meeting people. But Shoyuta felt this small irrational fear inside him and wanted to make sure that they would never make Izuku do something he wasn't comfortable with, even accidentally. Babies could recognize consent too. If Izuku didn't want to be held, he wouldn't reach out even if you reached out for him. Mama was quite happy by the nightfall and Izuku seemed to really like her, which made Shoyuta feel really happy. She left with tight hugs and kisses to everybody on the cheeks and a loving but stern order to keep her updated about Izuku and Hisashi to keep sending her those photos. By the time the Yamada family decided to come visit, Shoyuta did the strategic move to come 2 hours late so he could minimize the amount of time inside the hurricane that was Hisashi's family. Hisashi loved them, so of course Shoyuta loved them too, of course. But they were also a lot. There was many and it was loud, and Shoyuta could only endure it in small amounts. Izuku wasn't so lucky as to arrive late, but he survived through it and everybody loved him immediately. Izuku was becoming more and more lively. Playing, crawling, laughing, and babbling more and more every day. He wrapped everybody he met around his little finger the moment he graced them with that smile of his. Izuku was babbling that baby nonsense so much in fact that Hisashi kept saying that he was sure Izuku would say his first word any day now. And he was right, like he usually was. It was just another normal day. Hisashi was due to leave for work in like 5 minutes and so Shoyuta had been dragged out of bed to look after Izuku. He was getting better at early mornings but still, Shoyuta was already planning when he could take a nap with Izuku on the couch as he was groggily sipping his black coffee. Hisashi was about ready and leaned down to first give him a kiss for goodbye with an easy, "I love you too" exchange. Then Hisashi moved on from Shoyuta to Izuku and leaned down to give a kiss to Izuku on the cheek with an added hair ruffle. "Say bye to Papa, Izuku. I'll be back at afternoon," Hisashi said, and as he was straightening back up a small but happy "Papa" was heard, and they both froze and turned to stare at Izuku. Did he just? Oh my god! Hisashi wailed, already in tears, Izuku's first word. Hisashi ran off as Shoyuta continued on to stare at Izuku in amazement, not really knowing how to react. How could the first word? Why did he feel so unreasonably proud? It felt like his heart was swelling out of his chest from love to this silly little green angel who was confused as to why his dads were acting so strange all of a sudden. Hisashi came back sooner than he knew it with a camera, and it was on the kitchen table set to point to Izuku in seconds. The visibly buffering Shoyuta was in the frame with a confused Izuku as the camera was set to recording and Hisashi rounded the table to come next to Izuku once again. Izuku, look at Papa. Say bye to Papa as Papa leaves for work? Bye to Papa? Izuku seemed to forget his confusion, and as Hizashi continued on to encourage him with lots of repeats of Papa, soon enough. Papa, Izuku said, and Hizashi went wild, jumping up and cheering loudly. Ooh, Izuku! I love you so much. Papa loves you so much. Hizashi exclaimed as he lifted Izuku into his arms and gave him a dozen kisses on the cheeks. This made Izuku giggle as the kisses went nearer the neck area. Shuda's half-working morning brain was still trying to process everything. I don't want to leave, but Papa has to go to work, Hizashi wailed and gave 2 last kisses to each of Izuku's cheeks. Papa loves you so much. Say bye-bye to Papa. Papa! Izuku repeated, and Shoyuta looked on as Hizashi let out a small whimper and tried to hold back his tears. Izuku was handed to Shuda's hold, and Hizashi slowly backed out from the kitchen with one last, say bye-bye to Papa. Shoyuta definitely saw Hizashi's face finally crumble when once again Izuku replied with an excited, Papa, and he definitely heard a veil from him before the door could close. Izuku turned to look at the dad he was left with, looking a little confused again. Shoyuta sighed and shrugged. Izuku stayed in his lap as he finished his morning coffee with a couple last sips. So, I guess you can say Papa now. Hizashi had so been teaching that word to Izuku until he picked it up, but Hizashi was clearly Papa. They couldn't both be Papas. Then what am I? He thought. Izuku had learned to say, Daddy, by the time Hizashi returned from work. Shoyuta acted like this was a complete coincidence even when he had been repeating that word to Izuku probably over 1,000 times by now. The word had lost any meaning when Shoyuta said it, but finally hearing the word coming out of Izuku's mouth gave the word so much more meaning than it ever had had before. He was a daddy now. Namuri quite immediately loved Izuku once she finally got to meet him, announcing herself as his official Aunt Namuri and everything. Izuku was taught the word aunt quite fast. Izuku also took a liking to her quite fast, and they were buddies with each other before they even knew it. It made date nights a lot easier to have when there was a person who could babysit Izuku during it. They loved Izuku from the bottom of their hearts and all that, but compared to the time they didn't have a baby in the bedroom cock-blocking them, Shoyuta wasn't getting very much. Meaning he wasn't getting any. While they were both nervous train wrecks the first time they tried leaving Izuku to Namuri's care and have a go at a date night without the third-wheel baby in their way. And they refused to go any further than the nearest coffee shop at first. They were also really relieved and excited to book it to the nearest hotel once Namuri called half an hour into their date night that everything was fine and little Izuku loved his aunt, and they were having a blast. Date nights became more regular after that, of which Shoyuta was really happy because they were 2 young hot guys who kind of needed them. Time was also speeding up like way fast. Before they even knew it, Izuku stood up for the first time and then walked for the first time. He learned more and more new words every day. So he didn't just keep repeating Papa and Daddy all the time. They had a small birthday party for Izuku when he turned 1 by their set birthday for him. Izuku got a small cupcake with 1 birthday candle, and Hizashi sent the photo of them 3 sitting behind it to almost everyone they knew. It was becoming more and more known among their friends and family that they were dads now. When Izuku was reaching the age of 2, it became apparent that he was getting too big to sleep in the crib anymore. It had also become more and more apparent that their apartment was getting too small for them anymore. It had been pushing it with only Shoyuta and Hizashi. Then Izuku came into the picture, and it was an even tighter fit. Now with Izuku's stuff taking up pretty much the whole apartment and Izuku needing a new bed, it was finally decided that it was time to move. And so, they found a nice 3-bedroom apartment appropriately close to their hero agencies and nicely near the preschool that Izuku was to enroll in soon enough. Izuku got his own room with a bed and shelves with all his toys and a closet they could finally put Izuku's clothes in instead of their closet. Hizashi cried when Shoyuta refused to pack the clothes Izuku had already grown out of and ordered them to be recycled. Shoyuta was also pretty sure that Hizashi hadn't gotten rid of all of them and some of them had been smuggled into their new home. The move was a hassle and the new apartment was still littered with a lot unpacked boxes. But they did it. The first day of preschool came sooner than they realized it would, and Shoyuta and Hizashi were both there to leave Izuku with the preschool teacher's care. Izuku seemed a little unsure and just a bit afraid, especially when Hisashi started wailing when it came time to give goodbye hugs. What they had learned these past months was that Izuku was an emotional child. These days it seemed like they had absolutely different child compared to what Izuku was like the first moments they had him. Izuku was no longer quiet or afraid to cry. In fact, the more Izuku could speak, the more they noticed that Izuku mumbled to himself from time to time, especially if he was thinking of something really carefully. And Izuku also cried about a lot of stuff. If he was sad, he cried. If he was scared, he cried. If he was really happy, he cried. If he was really excited, he cried. If Hisashi cried, Izuku cried. And once again, like father like son, once Hisashi couldn't keep his tear ducts in check anymore, so couldn't Izuku. I don't want to leave Papa. Izuku cried from where he was buried in Hisashi's arms in a hug. Hisashi sniffed. It's okay, Izuku. Papa is okay. Hisashi got out between his sobs, which didn't really help at all. Shoyuta sighed at his overdramatic boyfriend and sensitive child. He gently guided Hisashi to go to the car and kneeled in front of Izuku. How are you feeling, veggie roll? Izuku sniffed and shrugged. Papa is just being overdramatic. He's just really happy that you are finally going to preschool and a little too excited. Izuku gave a small nod. It's okay to be nervous though, Shoyuta said carefully. Izuku stared at him for a moment. I'm scared, Daddy. It's okay to be scared. But the teachers here are going to take care of you just like Papa and Daddy. And you get to meet new friends and play and draw. I can draw? Izuku asked. Yeah, they have lots of supplies, Shoyuta smiled. Izuku still seemed unsure as he stared at the preschool building, and Shoyuta gently pulled him into a hug. You'll be safe. I will come get you sooner than you think, and you can tell us all about your day, Shoyuta promised. Izuku nodded into Shuta's chest, and Shoyuta carefully released him from the hug. Taking Izuku's hand, they walked together inside and found a teacher. The teacher was a gentle and calm-looking woman with soft blue hair and warm eyes. She kneeled to Izuku's level and asked him what he liked. Izuku shyly replied that he liked to draw, and she gave him an enthusiastic and bright smile. Well, we have lots of supplies for that. Come, I can show you. Izuku looked once more to his dad for reassurance, and Shoyuta nodded at him with a gentle smile. This seemed to encourage Izuku enough to go with the teacher to the drawing table. That afternoon, as Shoyuta came back to pick Izuku up, he was met with a bright smile and 6 drawings to take home. Izuku also announced that he found a new friend. What also transpired shortly after Izuku had started going regularly to preschool was his new obsession with heroes. Izuku had already started to learn to write just a little. He had already seen some heroes on the news, and Izuku also knew that his parents worked as heroes. The preschool skyrocketed that small observation into full-blown fanboying. All of a sudden, heroes were Izuku's favorite subject, and he could go on and on about everyone he had learned of. He drew heroes. He wanted to play a hero. He wanted to see heroes. And much to Shuta's indignation, Izuku's hero obsession also meant that Izuku had a clear favorite hero. And that was All Might. There was times Shoyuta felt the urge to throw the computer out the window after what seemed like the millionth time. He heard the words, "Fear not, citizens. Because I am here." But the reason he kept hearing those words was that, like most people, he was also defenseless at times against those huge green puppy eyes of Izuku. And the 1,000-watt smile that followed when you were too weak to say no to those eyes and gave in, saying yes. Izuku went absolutely crazy for that video, practically vibrating on his spot with excitement, clutching the small All Might figure in his hand and screeching in happiness. So, it was kind of worth it? Now the things Izuku wanted more than anything was anything hero-related. He already had a pretty impressive collection before his obsession bloomed, because pretty much every person Izuku had ever met was a professional hero, and society was pretty obsessed with heroes in and of itself, and so they kind of rolled into the fact that Izuku got a lot of hero-themed stuff. Yet in a short amount of time Izuku had been able to double that collection. Remember the weakness to say no to Izuku? Which spoke of his dedication. There was also the fact that Hisashi was starting to get more fame. He had started his own radio program, and he was there, fighting before the masses the big fights, during daylight, which made him visible and shoot up in the hero rankings. Eraserhead stayed safely as an underground hero who was barely known. One day after an exceptionally large and showy fight where Present Mike was involved, Izuku came home gushing to his dad, wanting to know everything. On one hand, Shoyuta was grateful for the break from Izuku's all-might obsession. On the other, Izuku now wanted to find all the hero videos he could see his papa in, and he wanted Present Mike merchandise, and then eventually realized that wait, both his parents said that they went to work to be heroes. Daddy, where's all your videos? Shoyuta paused for a moment looking back at Izuku, who stared at him with big curious eyes. Daddy is a hero too, right? You go to be a hero every night. I do. Then where's your hero videos? Can I see them? Please? Izuku asked, using those evil puppy dog eyes at him. Sorry, but you can't, Shoyuta said guiltily, because right after the second reason to not saying no to Izuku presented itself as sad-kicked puppy dog eyes that made you feel like you dumped a box full of kittens to a river. Oh, okay, Izuku said dejectedly and turned his gaze to the floor. Shoyuta wasn't sure whether or not Izuku knew that Izuku's tactic of never really protesting and just quietly and sadly accepting whatever he was told was a purposeful thing designed perfectly to make anyone cave in under the heavy pressure of guilt that followed. It would be so much easier to say no if Izuku just acted like an annoying brat that needed to learn some boundaries. The parents with kids who threw temper tantrums didn't know how lucky they were. Shoyuta could say no to those kids so easily. Izuku? Not so much. And so, he quickly rushed in to explain himself to Izuku so as to wipe that depressed look away from Izuku. No, Izuku. It's not that you can't watch the videos. I'm just afraid there isn't any. See, Daddy is an underground hero. I work at night, and I stay out of the public eye to keep my quirk unknown and to keep the upper hand when I'm fighting bad guys. Izuku blinked once at Shoyuta, seemingly processing everything he was told, and then just like that he was smiling again. It was tentative, and Izuku seemed to know that his daddy was feeling bad at seeing Izuku sad, and so he wanted to reassure him. Can you show me instead? He asked shyly. Oh, show you what? Your costume. And your fighting. Daddy's quirk is erasure, right? And Daddy uses his scarf to capture villains. You. Izuku exclaimed excitedly, throwing his hands into the air. I know. Let's play heroes. And Shoyuta was defenseless to protest. That night started Izuku's all-time favorite game, Heroes. Where Izuku was a hero, Shoyuta a hero, civilian or a villain, and yes, Hisashi was obligated to play too. Izuku usually wanted to save one of his fathers from the father playing villain. Though there were times they shook things up a bit and Izuku made, for example, Hisashi play the villain while Shoyuta was the hero to save Izuku, the civilian. Izuku loved to draw, and for a soon-to-be 3-year-old he was rather talented at drawing heroes, and he was starting to know enough kanji to write the heroes' names and some simple facts about them next to the photos, with a little help at times. Izuku was eating up so much paper that they decided to get him thick notebooks to draw in. Named by Izuku as Hero Analysis for the Future Notebooks. The first 2 entries were of Eraserhead and Present Mike, lovingly and carefully written and with detailed pictures. Only after that came the rest of the heroes Izuku knew. All Might was after them, the 3rd entry, and Shoyuta was surprisingly pleased of the order. It was the moment when Izuku came back home gushing about his friend, Kaken, that got his quirk today. Telling his fathers that Kaken was so awesome, and he's going to be an incredible hero, and I can't wait to get my quirk. That Shoyuta and Hisashi were reminded that Izuku would probably get his quirk in 3 months if he were to get it around his estimated 4th birthday like so many children did. They were also reminded of the fact that they had no way of knowing what kind of quirk Izuku would be getting. It wasn't exactly guaranteed that a child would get a quirk similar to their parents, but there was a high chance of that. And so most parents could play some kind of guessing game of will their child inherit something like their mother's quirk or their father's or possibly both. In a world of quirks, couldn't be guaranteed that the first time a child activated their quirk, it would happen in a controlled environment and that the child's quirk would be safe for everyone around. Even non-destructive quirks could do some damage when first appearing in a child not at all experienced at handling them. So, Yes, it wasn't that Izuku was that different from any other child who might get their quirks at any moment. There were safety methods developed to handle a possible difficult quirk presenting itself during daycare or in public. But then there was the fact that Izuku's quirk could be one of the biggest clues to figuring out who his biological parents could be after years of nothing. And even though Izuku was perfectly normal and happy child, there was that looming threat of Izuku's birth parents. Who were they? Were they still looking for Izuku? Would they try to take him if they were to find him? Would they hurt Izuku? How might Izuku react to finding out who his biological parents were? And again, we are circling back to the fact that stereotypically, villains had particularly dangerous quirks. And therefore, assuming at least one of Izuku's parents was a villain, there was a high chance of Izuku getting a dangerous quirk. And so very much to Izuku's confusion, one night his parents came to him to explain that they were pulling him out of preschool for a while. But why? See, Daddy and Papa want to be there when you get your quirk, which might happen any day now as your 4th birthday approaches. But Kaken didn't get pulled away from school before he got his quirk, Izuku muttered. Yes, but we really want to make sure that at least one of us is there when you get your quirk. After that you can go back to daycare like normal, Hisashi smiled. Izuku got his intense thinking look on his face and he fell into quiet and incoherent muttering. Shoyuta and Hisashi shared a look and decided to leave Izuku to think things through at his own pace. That night at supper Izuku declared that he wanted to stay at home until he got his quirk. Shoyuta and Hisashi contacted the school about pulling Izuku out of it for a while. Luckily the school was very understanding seeing as there were other parents with the same request at times and it was only preschool after all. It was fine until Shoyuta came to pick Izuku up after his last day at preschool for now and Izuku looked all depressed at the back seat of the car and at first refused to tell what the matter was. Shoyuta didn't press because he knew Izuku would come to him once he was ready. And that night Izuku crawled between him and Hisashi to sleep and explained shyly that Kaken hadn't understood why Izuku was leaving school. And that now Izuku was afraid that Kaken wouldn't want to be friends with him anymore once he got back. Shoyuta assured Izuku that Kaken was just upset that he wouldn't get to see Izuku for a while, but he would be really glad to see Izuku once he returned. Izuku fell asleep with Shoyuta rubbing his back comfortingly. And so, they went back to the routine they had before Izuku had started preschool where Shoyuta took care of Izuku during the day and Hisashi would take care of Izuku during the night. Compared to when Izuku was a baby, Izuku was a lot more hyper, and it was a lot more difficult to get him to take a nap. Shoyuta still found a way. Izuku was his child after all, and they would take naps together on the couch, each in their own sleeping bags. The sleeping bags matched in every way but the color. Where Shoyuta was a yellow caterpillar, Izuku was a green one. The rest of the time Shoyuta was looking after Izuku involved drawing heroes, talking about heroes, making notes about heroes, watching heroes, reading news about heroes, and most importantly, playing heroes. And they fell back into that routine quite easily and again time seemed to just fly by. Izuku's 4th birthday was coming closer and closer. Izuku was getting more and more excited about getting his quirk. Theorizing and dreaming about what it could be. It created some tense moments for Shoyuta and Hisashi when Izuku mentioned getting either of their quirks or a combination of them, but Izuku blows through that subject so fast to new quirk possibilities that he wouldn't even leave any time for his fathers to start explaining about birds and bees, mothers and fathers and adoption and where they got Izuku from. Shoyuta was very grateful that he didn't have to have that conversation just yet. The night Izuku got his quirk, they were 5 days short from his birthday. The day had gone perfectly normal. Shoyuta had made lunch to Izuku while he drew heroes. They played heroes together where they were both heroes fighting an invisible villain that was wrecking the apartment. This piece of imagination stemmed from the fact that the apartment was a bit messy at the time. Hisashi came home to Shoyuta and Izuku napping on the couch together. Not knowing how long Shoyuta had had to tire Izuku out to get him to sleep, Hisashi decided to let them be for now. They had a quick dinner together before Shoyuta went to work, kissing both his boyfriend and son goodbye. Izuku was laughing, running away from Hisashi, who was playing the villain, jumping over furniture, slamming hallway doors behind him to slow down the villain out to catch him. Here I come. Hisashi boomed with a controlled use of his quirk that made his voice loud and things vibrate just a bit but nothing destructive. He could hear Izuku giggling like wild somewhere in the house where he had managed to escape. You shall not escape from great and glorious terror voice. He is great. He is awesome. He is undefeated. And there's nothing you can do to stop him. The Might Kid will. Izuku yelled back. Hisashi smirked as he took off in a new hunt. He found Izuku from under the kitchen table. The unstoppable terror voice has found you. You can't catch me. Izuku crawled from under the table and took off, Hisashi following him in just slightly slowed down pace. Izuku was quick and agile, yes, but at his full speed Hisashi could still easily catch him, but that just wasn't fun. The game was reaching the point where Hisashi was supposed to catch Izuku before his ultimate defeat. When Izuku was running over the couch, Hisashi grabbed him around the waist, spinning him once before gently throwing him on the couch and attacking Izuku's sides with tickles. Izuku giggled like wild, but Hisashi had to let up soon enough so as not to make him pee his pants. He gave Izuku a couple seconds to catch his breath while letting himself sag into the couch cushions too. Izuku was faster at catching his breath than Hisashi and soon jumped on top of Hisashi to trap him. The Might Kid has captured you, terror voice. Surrender now. No. Hisashi wailed in mock defeat, aiming his amplified voice into a direction where it wouldn't harm Izuku. How could I be defeated? The great and powerful terror voice. Izuku laughed again and flexed his biceps. Nothing can beat the Might Kid. Oh yeah? Hisashi asked with a smirk. Not even this? Izuku was once again attacked with tickles and he squirmed, trying to get away from the offending fingers. No. Papa stoop. He got out between giggles. Who's the best? No one can beat the tickle duo. Izuku was starting to be so out of breath that Hisashi let him be again. He felt Izuku against him, completely exhausted and trying to catch his breath. Hisashi smiled gently and softly petted Izuku's green curls. Tired little listener? No, I'm not tired. I can go on forever. Oh yeah? You think you can beat me? I can beat Papa at anything. Well, I bet you can't scream like this. Hisashi said and amplified his voice once again. Yes, I can. Hey. Izuku yelled with all the might his little lungs could produce. It was a good thing that they had soundproofed the whole apartment because Izuku and Hisashi ended up having what was basically a screaming contest and that could potentially disturb and worry the neighbors. Papa took turns screaming with his normal voice and his quirk amplified voice. Izuku was getting out of breath with all the screaming from the bottom of his lungs. He was snuggled into Papa's side with Papa's arm around his shoulder. He could feel the difference between how Papa's normal voice vibrated his body and how Papa's quirk voice vibrated his body. It was then that Izuku noticed something different too. He didn't know how to really catalog the feeling. It was in him, but it was also in Papa. When Papa used his quirk, Izuku felt warmth. Energy? Coming off Papa's throat. It was vivid and loud, and it reminded Izuku of the feeling of screaming as loud as he could, of loud noise, of vibrations of the ground that one time he walked by a construction site with a man drilling the asphalt road. Izuku's hand was on Papa's chest, and when Papa yelled with a normal voice it vibrated less and Izuku also couldn't feel the feeling. I bet you can't yell like this. Triple A. Izuku felt the feeling again. It was in Papa, but Izuku was so curious about it that he reached out. Triple A? What? Izuku didn't notice how Papa's scream cut off abruptly or how Papa seemed confused all of a sudden. He was too busy wondering about how all of a sudden, the feeling was inside of him. It was there at the bottom of his throat, warm and different and sending energy through his body. Izuku blinked trying to feel his throat, wondering what happened. He didn't notice how the feeling had disappeared altogether from Papa. In his throat it wasn't even that subtle. He could clearly feel something there even when the quirk wasn't doing anything. Iya. Izuku tried to scream at first normally, but then all of a sudden, his voice was so loud. Just like Papa's. It was even louder than Papa's, making things shake and making a lamp fall to the floor. Papa look. Triple A. Izuku yelled and his voice was so loud even Papa had to cover his ears. I got my quirk. My quirk is just like Papa's. Izuku celebrated jumping off the couch and jumping in excitement. Izuku didn't notice how pale Papa had gotten and how he stared at Izuku in horror as he had to cover his ears because Izuku didn't know how to control his volume like Hisashi could, and he was basically using the voice quirk at full volume. It was making things shake, and Hisashi glanced worriedly at the windows, fearing that they might break any moment now. Now I can be a hero just like Papa. I will be the Mike Kid. Izuku cheered. Right, Papa? Izuku asked and turned to look at his father. Hisashi tried to do something. Maybe smile at Izuku, who was so excited, or answer him, but Hisashi's hands were shaking and he felt. It wasn't really anything painful. He felt almost normal. Almost. Except he wasn't. He could feel the absence. He could feel that something was missing. Using his quirk was like second nature for him because he had had it all his life. He literally came out of the womb crying with his quirk, damaging his parents and the doctor's ears with how loud his cries were. He had had to learn to control his quirk as soon as he was cognitive enough to start learning. And it had always been there, and he didn't even need to think about how to use it. But now it wasn't. He tried to reach for it and there was nothing there. And then realizing that Izuku had just taken his quirk made him feel cold and afraid. Horror gripping his throat so not even his normal voice could come out. Right, Papa? Izuku was still using the amplified voice, so it was a weird mixture of a shy, unsure voice with the volume of a loudspeaker. Izuku's eyes were quickly filling with worry as he noticed his Papa's expression. Is everything all right, Papa? Hisashi coughed, trying to get his voice working again. Izuku. What happened just now? What do you mean? Izuku asked, confused. Izuku, you have to be really careful. With the voice quirk, it can do a lot of damage if you can't control your volume. That's why Papa uses the directional speaker around his neck outside of home. And Papa only uses his quirk at home very rarely. Can you control your volume? Izuku's eyes filled with fear as he noticed that his voice was still coming at a loud volume. Trailing off into silence, Izuku stared at his father in helplessness. It's okay, Izuku. Would it be easier to give Papa his quirk back, so you don't have to think about controlling your volume? What? Izuku asked in horror, and Hisashi noticed how Izuku's eyes focused on his throat. Papa's quirk. It isn't there. Izuku screamed in terror. Hisashi filed the information that Izuku seemed to be able to see or sense his quirk for later. Izuku, it's okay. You can just give Papa his quirk back, don't you? I took Papa's quirk? Izuku asked, confused with his eyes filling with tears. Hisashi started to see the approaching panic getting closer and hurriedly tried to soothe Izuku. Izuku, Hisashi shushed. It's okay. Just breathe. You must have gotten your quirk just now. You just need to focus and give it back. He tried to reassure, but he wasn't even sure if Izuku could give the quirk back. God, he hoped he could. Izuku's eyes were filling with more and more tears, his bottom lip quivering. Here, Hisashi said and pulled Izuku to him, pressing his little hand on his chest. You touched me like this when you accidentally took it, didn't you? Just try to do it in reverse. Izuku looked down from Hisashi's eyes and looked at his own hand on Hisashi's chest. Hisashi saw a small crease between Izuku's eyebrows as he seemed to try and concentrate on something, but he didn't feel anything, and a moment later the crease disappeared as desperation spread over Izuku's features. He lifted his tears-filled panicked eyes to his Papa. Hearing his own voice amplified seemed to further upset Izuku, and he was starting to breath raggedly. I can't. I don't know how. All of a sudden Izuku pulled away from Hisashi's hold and withdrew another step when Hisashi tried to reach out for him. I stole Papa's quirk. Izuku screamed in horror, and the next thing Hisashi knew, Izuku was crying and gasping for breath. No! Izuku screamed as Hisashi tried to reach him to comfort Izuku, and Izuku jerked back from the approaching hand. Izuku was getting more and more panicked, and all his sobs and cries were amplified to deafening volumes, and Hisashi desperately wanted to comfort Izuku, but right now, trying to touch seemed to send Izuku into a panic. Izuku's volume was getting more and more loud, so much so that the furniture was vibrating as if in an earthquake. The curtains were waving as if in a gust of wind. The windows were trembling worriedly, and the photo frames on the walls were starting to fall down. Izuku's sobs were so loud that even covering his ears wasn't enough. With a guilty and heavy heart, Hisashi had to retreat away from Izuku. He went to his and Shuta's bedroom and pulled his cell phone out. Shoyuta picked up after 3 rings. "Shoyuta, you need to come home." When Shuta's phone started to vibrate in his pocket, Shoyuta answered it immediately. Even Hisashi knew not to call him during work unless it was an emergency. Shoyuta didn't know what to think when the next thing he heard was Hisashi's panicked voice telling him to come home over the loud cries at the background. Hisashi couldn't explain further in the phone, just telling him to hurry. Shoyuta had never run so fast back home. When he arrived, it was to Hisashi outside of their apartment pacing worriedly. Their house was very soundproofed, but he could still hear loud cries from inside. "Oh, Shoyuta, thank God," Hisashi exclaimed once he got to him and pulled him into a crushing hug. Shoyuta could feel Hisashi sobbing to his shoulder. "What is it? What's happening?" Shoyuta asked as he gently stroked Hisashi's hair in a soothing manner. His hair was a mess of tangles, telling him that he must have been running his hands through them in worry quite a lot. Hisashi sobbed, and Shoyuta tensed immediately. "What about Izuku? Hisashi, look at me. What happened?" he demanded, pulling Hisashi at arm's length and staring at him intently. Hisashi had tears streaming down his cheeks and he looked desperate. "Erek. Izuku got his quirk. I don't know what it is exactly, but he took my quirk." "What?" Shoyuta asked in horror. "He took my quirk accidentally and now he can't control the volume of the voice quirk and he's upset that he can't give it back and he's been crying for like 20 minutes or so and he won't let me come near him and I don't know what to do. Shoyuta, I'm so sorry." Hisashi cried and tears fell from his eyes once more, sobs breaking out. Shoyuta stared at him in horror, trying to process everything. Turning to look at the house, you could clearly hear amplified sobs coming from inside. "God, I don't know what to do. Izuku is so upset, and I just want to comfort him, but I can't get near him. I can't." Shoyuta shushed Hisashi and gently wiped the tears from his cheeks. "It's okay. I'm here, I'll handle it. Just breathe," Shoyuta told him. He reached to kiss Hisashi on the forehead before letting him go and heading inside. He had to cover his ears the closer he got. Opening the door made him almost topple down from the force of the sound. Their home was a mess, with anything that was able to fall now fallen on the floor, some of it broken. Shoyuta resolutely headed for the direction the sound was coming from, louder and louder. There he found Izuku sobbing on the floor, basically having a panic attack with how much he kept gasping for breath between his sobs. Their furniture has actually moved away from him from how loud his voice was. There was some broken glass on the floor. Shoyuta didn't hesitate to activate his quirk the moment he had Izuku on. His sight and the absence of quirk-amplified volume seemed to shock Izuku into stopping for a moment. He raised his gaze to his father and once he saw the flowing hair and red eyes of his dad, his lower lip started trembling again and big fat tears rolled down his cheeks. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I didn't mean to steal Papa's quirk. I don't wanna keep it." Izuku sniffed and bowed his head in defeat, his whole small frame shaking. Shoyuta couldn't break his eye contact from Izuku. That would probably mean that the voice quirk would activate again. He calmly walked over to Izuku, but when he kneeled to his level and tried to reach out for Izuku, Izuku violently jerked away, his sobs turning more panicked. No, I don't want to take Daddy's quirk too." It had been too long, and Shoyuta had to blink twice to relieve the burning in his eyes from using his quirk. Sure enough, Izuku's sobs amplified into ear-deafening volumes for those 2 seconds. Izuku whimpered in agony and slapped his small hands over his mouth to muffle himself. Izuku jerked back again when Shoyuta tried to reach for him, but Shoyuta wouldn't have it. He pulled Izuku to himself and pressed him into a tight hug even as he made sure to not take his eyes off him. "Izuku, it's okay. Just breathe. Try to listen to my breathing and match it." Izuku was still weakly struggling against his hold, but Shoyuta wouldn't have it and tightly wrapped him in a hug, pressing Izuku's ear against his chest and covering the other one with his hand. Shoyuta was glad that he was able to keep calm even now thanks to his hero training. He focused into breathing calmly and keeping his heart rate steady even if he couldn't keep his heart from beating just a little faster than normal. At least it wasn't beating rapidly like Izuku's was deducing from his pulse Shoyuta could feel in Izuku's hand he was holding. Shoyuta also had to crunch his teeth and focus on keeping his quirk activated even as his eyes burned. This close to Izuku, the voice quirk could be potentially damaging to him if it were to activate. Izuku stopped protesting and curled into his dad's hold. His shoulders shook with sobs, and he whimpered, but compared to before it seemed like eerily quiet. One of Izuku's hands was clutched in Shuta's capture gear scarf. Shoyuta was so thankful that Izuku actually calmed down relatively fast, and before he even knew it, Izuku's muscles were relaxing in his hold, and as he looked down, he saw that Izuku had passed out. The boy must have been exhausted from his panic attack. Shoyuta made sure to keep a tight hold on Izuku, using his capture gear as help as he stood up holding Izuku in his arms and finally deactivating his own quirk and closing his eyes to revive the stinging pain of two dry eyes. "Here," he heard a whisper and turned to see Hizashi coming for him with a bottle of eye drops in his hand. He obediently tilted his head back so that Hizashi could trickle a drop to each eye, and then he blinked rapidly to let the moisture spread to his eyes. "Thanks," he whispered back. They were both being as quiet as possible, careful not to wake Izuku up. Shoyuta looked around their home that looked almost like a hurricane had gone through it. How is he?" Hizashi asked carefully. Shoyuta turned to him to see tears glimmering in his eyes. "Exhausted. He pretty much passed out once he calmed down even a little." Hizashi looked absolutely miserable, and he nodded. His lower lip was trembling slightly, but he was forcefully pushing down the sobs that wanted to break out to make sure that he wouldn't disturb Izuku. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, and Shoyuta had never heard Hizashi sound so quiet and upset. It disturbed him a lot. "What happened?" "We were doing a screaming contest," Hizashi whispered and softly ran his hand through Izuku's green curls. "I was occasionally using my quirk and then it disappeared. Then all of a sudden Izuku had my quirk." Hizashi met Shuta's gaze with absolute misery. He didn't realize at first that he hadn't gotten his quirk but actually taken mine. Once he did, he started to panic when he couldn't give it back, and Hizashi's voice broke, and Shoyuta felt the need to comfort Hizashi too, but his hands were already occupied with holding Izuku. And then he started crying and I couldn't do anything. I'm so sorry." Shoyuta hushed Hizashi gently. "It wasn't your fault. It's okay. I'm Izuku's father. I should have been able to." "Hizashi," Shoyuta said sternly, "don't think like that." Hizashi looked like he wanted to protest, but he just bowed his head in defeat. Shoyuta sighed. The home was a mess. Hizashi was a mess. Izuku was a mess. Quite frankly, even Shoyuta felt like he was on the edge of falling into a mess himself. He wasn't sure what to do, and it seemed that right now he was supposed to be the person with the answers. All he felt was exhausted. Hizashi looked exhausted too, even more so. Much more so, and he was looking at Izuku with such sadness at his eyes. "How are you feeling?" "Guilty. I should have been able to comfort Dash." No. "How are you feeling?" "Not having a quirk." Hizashi raised his gaze to Shoyuta in surprise. "Oh, right, I was just so worried about Izuku that I didn't even think about that. I feel pretty normal. There is this feeling of something missing, maybe like a phantom limb with how used to my quirk I am, but Hizashi raised his gaze to Shoyuta with resolution in his eyes. "I don't care if I get my quirk back or not. I can quit being a hero, I can't quit being Izuku's father, and I just want him to be okay." Sadness covered Hizashi's features again, and he bit his lip looking at the sleeping Izuku in Shuta's arms. "I just want him to believe that it will be all right and Izuku to be okay again, and I'll be okay too." Shoyuta studied Hizashi carefully, sighing sadly. "Here, hold him and both of you go to sleep," he ordered. No. Izuku didn't want me to hold him. He didn't want me to touch him either at first. He was upset and scared that he might do something again by touching us, but I don't think he will. He probably needs you more than me right now. He will feel better waking up in his papa's arms, and you both need rest desperately right now. I need to make sure that I'm awake to erase the voice quirk if Izuku wakes up again. Hizashi just told him. Hizashi looked just a bit unsure, but he reached out and Shoyuta carefully moved the sleeping boy from his hold to Hizashi's. Izuku was so out of it that he didn't even stir. Hizashi gently stroked his hand through Izuku's hair and gave him a kiss to the top of his head, finally pressing his face to the soft curls and breathing in. Shoyuta reached over to slide Hizashi's arm from shoulder down. Go lie down and sleep. We will figure this out. Okay, Hizashi whispered, and it was so quiet that he could barely hear it. Izuku woke up gently wrapped in his papa's arms, and for a moment he didn't remember anything that had happened. But soon enough that blissful moment between sleep and wakefulness disappeared and everything came back to him. Izuku pressed his lips tightly closed, afraid that if he let out a sound it would come out so very loud again. Part of him wanted to pull away from Papa's hold, scared that he would do something wrong again, but a bigger part of him wanted to stay in his Papa's hold where it was safe and familiar. He wanted to believe for a moment that his Papa didn't hate him, that his daddy didn't hate him, that he hadn't just destroyed his Papa's hero career. Papa had saved so many people and he could still save so many more people, but now he couldn't. Because of him. Izuku bit his lips so hard that it hurt, but he wouldn't let out a sound. If he did, Papa would wake up and he wouldn't be in Papa's hold anymore. Izuku couldn't help the tears that escaped from his eyes that were squeezed shut tightly. He didn't want to take Papa's quirk. He hadn't meant to do so. He wanted to give it back, but he didn't know how. He didn't want to be a thief. He wanted his Papa. He just wanted his Papa. Izuku tried to remember what had happened before he could yell really loudly. He remembered the feeling that bloomed inside him when Papa was using his quirk, of loudness and laughter and vibrations. It was coming from Papa's throat, and it was warm, and if he closed his eyes, it almost seemed like he could see Papa's quirk, but he couldn't really describe just what he was seeing, only that he did. Izuku closed his eyes and there it was. The feeling was in his own throat and not Papa's right now. Because he took it. Like a thief. Izuku could feel panic gripping him again, but he tried to push it away with all of the strength the soon-to-be 4-year-old had ever possessed. If he could just stay calm and give back Papa's quirk, then everything would be fine again. Izuku rested his open palm over Papa's heartbeat while he could hear it with his ear pressed against Papa's side. He focused on the feeling on his throat and tried to think about moving it from his throat, through his hand, through Papa's heartbeat, to Papa's throat, where it belonged. Izuku couldn't even remember how he had gotten the quirk, what it had felt like. It seemed like it had just happened. But he had done it, this was his quirk. If he could take Papa's quirk, he must also be able to give it back. It happened like a click. Not like the sound, but like the feeling of something lodging perfectly back into its place. Izuku wasn't really sure how it figured it out. Or what he figured out. But he did it. He knew he did it. The feeling wasn't in his throat anymore. It was in Papa's. He could feel it. He did it. It was then that Papa stirred, and at first, he was blinking confused, but then his eyes widened, and he turned his head to look at Izuku, and for a moment they just stared at each other. Izuku's heart started to race while he waited for Papa's response. Did Papa still hate him? Was Papa still scared of him? Papa could feel that his quirk was back, right? Izuku. It's back, right? Papa has his quirk again, right? Izuku. Shoyuta asked from where he was sitting beside the bed. Hizashi sat up slowly, bringing Izuku up with him. I do. I have my quirk back, Hizashi said in wonder. I have my quirk back. Hizashi exclaimed in excitement, using his voice quirk again. It was loud but controlled. Izuku couldn't help but smile. But then a moment later he was crying again. He felt so overwhelmed with emotions, relieved, happy, scared. It was all a mess of emotions of knowing Papa had his quirk back and feeling it was where it belonged and remembering everything that had happened. He felt so overwhelmed about all of them that he didn't know what he felt. He did know though that both Papa and Daddy were hugging him and comforting him. He felt safe. Shoyuta and Hizashi held Izuku until he calmed down. Shoyuta was pretty sure that at least Izuku was a little less upset and panicked and more just overwhelmed. Izuku was tightly pressed between them in a hug. Izuku was holding to each of them with his little fists as if to make sure his fathers wouldn't disappear anywhere. They were both happy to stay that way until he was fully calmed down. When Izuku hadn't been crying in a while, more like just clutching at them for support, Shoyuta carefully stroked his hand through Izuku's hair and asked, "How are you feeling, Green Bean?" "Hungry." Shoyuta exchanged glances with Hizashi, both of them having the same thought, that was that the house was a chaos and Izuku would get upset again once he saw it. "How about we eat breakfast in bed?" Izuku turned to his dad in confusion. "But it isn't my birthday yet." "Sometimes it doesn't have to be a special occasion to eat breakfast in bed," Shoyuta assured with a chuckle and ruffled Izuku's hair before getting up. "Daddy is making breakfast?" Izuku asked, and there was obvious worry in his voice. Shoyuta put his hands to his hips and lifted an eyebrow at Izuku. "What? You think I can't?" he asked, affronted. Izuku stared at Shoyuta for a couple seconds and then turned to Hizashi. "Papa should make breakfast." Shoyuta laughed in disbelief and pointed an accusing finger at Izuku. "I will prepare us an awesome breakfast, you little troll. Just wait and see." Hizashi couldn't help his smile when Izuku burst into giggles. Neither could Shoyuta. But then Shoyuta turned to walk out of the room and Izuku happened to look at the living room through the open door and his giggles cut off abruptly and his smile disappeared as shock took over, and a moment later, he bowed his head. Hizashi felt a painful stab at the bottom of his stomach seeing Izuku upset again, and he had no idea what to say to make him feel better. "Izuku, it wasn't your fault." Izuku didn't even pretend to agree by nodding. His head stayed down, and his gaze seemed to move even further from Hizashi. "You just got your quirk. Almost no one can control their quirk when they first get it. The voice quirk takes practice to handle. I was born with the voice quirk and damaged my parents' and the doctor's ears when I was delivered. But I'm not a baby, and I wasn't even supposed to have that quirk. I stole it. My quirk is bad. How can I be a hero if I can't use my quirk?" "Your quirk isn't bad." Izuku turned his gaze to Hizashi, and he was shocked by how sure and resolute Izuku looked. "If I use my quirk and take someone else's quirk, they won't have their quirk anymore." "My quirk is stealing," Izuku stated, and his voice didn't waver. He sounded absolutely sure about himself. Hizashi raised his gaze to Shoyuta, who had just entered the bedroom with 3 bowls in his hands. He had heard Izuku too. "Can I still be a hero if I can't use my quirk?" Shoyuta was careful approaching the situation and seating himself on the other side of Izuku. Izuku was shyly glancing at Hizashi for response, but Hizashi seemed to be lost for words. "Izuku," Shoyuta said, "if you really want to, you can be a hero without a quirk. But it will take a lot of work and you will need a lot of strength, so here." Shoyuta was handing Izuku one of the bowls in his hands. "Start by eating breakfast." Izuku looked from the bowl to his dad. "Daddy, this is ice cream." "Good observation. You need that if you want to be a hero," Shoyuta stated nonchalantly. "Daddy, you can't eat ice cream for breakfast." Izuku said, affronted. "Sure you can." Izuku looked unsure and turned to Hizashi. "Papa? Is it okay to eat ice cream for breakfast?" Shoyuta rolled his eyes at being apparently so untrustworthy when it came to breakfast in Izuku's eyes. Hizashi was smirking. "It's okay to have a cheat day every once in a while, let's just enjoy it this time, but don't start expecting ice cream for breakfast every day," Hizashi stated with a stern voice and pointed at Izuku before taking his spoon and scooping a big spoonful of ice cream to his mouth, immediately getting an exaggerated brain freeze. Izuku giggled. For a small moment they all forgot their worries and just enjoyed their ice cream breakfast in bed. To both Hizashi's and Shuta's surprise, once they were all done, Izuku demanded to collect their bowls, and before they could stop him, Izuku was already scooting out of the bed and rushing to the kitchen to put the dishes to the dishwasher. "Daddy, where's the vacuum cleaner?" They heard him yell and realized they had to hurry much faster after Izuku. By the time they found Izuku in the hallway, Izuku was already opening the cleaning closet and trying to pull the vacuum cleaner out. "What ya doing, champ?" Shoyuta asked with his arms crossed. "Cleaning," Izuku replied happily. Shoyuta stared from Izuku to the apartment that was a complete mess, with even broken glass on the floor from some picture frames that had fallen to the floor and shattered. A 4-year-old was not responsible enough to be cleaning out broken glass. "Okay, sure, Izuku, but how about you start with our own room first? Last time I saw it, it was littered with clothes and toys." Izuku stared at the chaos that was their home for a moment and seemed a bit unsure. Didn't I tell you to clean your room yesterday? I think you should finish that first before starting any other projects, don't you think? Izuku nodded. Right? Okay, I'll clean my room first. As soon as Izuku was gone, Shoyuta shoved the vacuum cleaner to Hisashi. Start cleaning the broken glass away before he gets the chance to try. They spent the morning late spring cleaning the house, really late, it was summer. Izuku was like a powerhouse, first going through his own room, placing all his stuff in order, vacuuming, dusting, rubbing all dirty spots away, and then he moved on to the living room, which was hopefully safe from any broken glass now. Every once in a while, they caught Izuku looking a little bit guilty and sad, but it was wiped away a moment later by determination and a new spurt of cleaning energy. The house was spotless by the end of a very hard day. Izuku was strangely quiet throughout the day even though he looked like he was thinking very hard. Usually, it was just that Izuku muttered when he was thinking hard, and now there was barely even that at all. Shoyuta and Hisashi figured that they should let Izuku work out his stuff on his own pace and not to disturb him during the process. It was a good thing that Izuku basically tired himself out, so he pretty much fell into his bed with new fresh sheets and was out like a lamp. It gave Shoyuta and Hisashi a chance to talk in peace. Izuku was really fired up about cleaning today, wasn't he? Hisashi said. He felt like it was his fault the house was a mess and he felt obligated to clean it up, Shoyuta stated. Hisashi stopped with his hair brushing for a moment to sigh. Yeah. There was a couple of moments of silence between them. So, how do you feel about this? Hisashi asked tentatively. Shoyuta stared at the wall as he thought. Quite honestly, if there was anyone in the world that would get this kind of a quirk, I'm quite thankful that it was Izuku. What? Hisashi exclaimed and turned to stare at Shoyuta with big, shocked eyes. How come? I just think that most people couldn't handle it. The ones who wouldn't want to take others' quirks would be driven to madness by other people's prejudice against them and the fear of not being able to handle it. The ones who would start taking other people's quirks would try to do it in a villainous way where they wouldn't care whose quirk they would take, permission or not. And Izuku? Izuku, Shoyuta paused to ponder. Izuku would never hurt anyone intentionally. I don't know if it will take a learning curve for him to learn to control it, but we know that Izuku can both take and give back quirks. If Izuku would ever take a quirk from someone he didn't mean to, he would also give it back. Shoyuta stared at Hisashi with absolute certainty in his eyes. And you saw Izuku today. It wasn't like being in his near vicinity made him accidentally take our quirks. Izuku asked if he can be a hero without using his quirk. And I know he's only 3, almost 4, but I get the feeling that he just might be able to do it. And we will support him every step of the way, Hisashi finished. Shoyuta smirked at his boyfriend and pulled him into a kiss. That we will. The next morning Hisashi woke up first like he usually did. What was kind of surprising was that Shoyuta managed to be in the breakfast table before Izuku. Seeing that Hisashi was the only resident in the kitchen, Shoyuta made a detour to check up on Izuku. He was still out cold to the world and Shoyuta figured he should let him be for now. Hisashi handed him a cup of coffee once he came back to the kitchen and sat at the table. Shoyuta smiled at him gratefully and was rewarded with a quick kiss. Hisashi was going full out with their breakfast that morning, preparing steamed rice, miso soup and vegetable dishes to complete the set. Shoyuta was pretty sure he noticed some tamagoyaki on the pan. It was nice domestic bliss with their quiet atmosphere and easy coexistence. Izuku was supposed to go back to preschool once he got his quirk. Shoyuta started. Hisashi stopped for a moment before continuing on with his cooking. Can't that wait until after his birthday at least? Get a little more used to things, Hisashi said. Shoyuta hummed and stared at his coffee. Sure, that sounds alright. We should get Namuri to babysit Izuku today. Why? We should go to the station and tell Chief Tsuragami about Izuku's quirk. Hisashi turned around to stare at Shoyuta. What why? Shoyuta stared at Hisashi for a moment over his coffee cup. Don't you think it's important? There were never any leads as to who Izuku's bio-parents are. His quirk is the biggest one we've got. Hisashi didn't answer right away, turning back to his cooking and focusing on that instead. What does it even matter anymore? Izuku has his quirk now and he's ours. Why should we try to find out where he came from? So, we can be sure nobody is gonna try and take him away from us. It's been 3 years. How much of a risk is that even? Nobody has even tried. It's still better to know if there's still a risk of that ever happening. We don't know anything right now, and what about when Izuku starts asking questions about the birds and bees and where he came from? What then if we don't have any answers for him? You actually want to tell him? Hisashi asked. Shoyuta could only see his back, but Hisashi's voice sounded tight and tense, and Shoyuta saw how his muscles had all tensed up. Shoyuta got up slowly and headed to hug Hisashi from behind and rest his chin on his shoulder. It's better than lying to him. That would just create more problems than it's trying to avoid. Hisashi sighed, and Shoyuta could feel Hisashi's muscles relaxing a bit under his touch. I'm just scared of what he will think of us. Of himself. Izuku will know that we are his parents and that it doesn't matter where he came from. He's smart like that. Hisashi chuckled. We are just going there to talk with Chief Tsuragami. It will be fine. I have never even heard of a villain that could steal quirks, Hisashi muttered. What was that? Nothing. All right, I'll call Namuri. It was then they heard small footsteps coming their way, and they both turned to see a very sleepy-looking Izuku walking towards the kitchen. His hair was an even bigger mess than usual, and he was rubbing his eyes and yawning with all wrinkled clothes. Good morning, sleepyhead, Shoyuta greeted with a smirk. Even Izuku seemed a little confused about the fact that Shoyuta was up before him. They made the arrangements and decided to go talk to Chief Tsuragami at night after Hisashi came back from work. For all appearances and purposes, Izuku was fine enough, and they shouldn't keep stretching their leave of absence any longer and just go back to the routine. Namuri came together with Hisashi. They ate dinner together before leaving Izuku with her and headed to their appointment with Chief Tsuragami. They arrived at the police station and were directed to the chief's office. The secretary next to the door to the room knocked for them and went inside before telling them it was okay to go inside. They stepped inside and Chief Tsuragami was sitting behind a desk. He got up to shake hands with both of them before they all took seats, Aizawa and Yamada on the 2 chairs in front of the table. So, it's been some time since we last saw each other. How is little Izuku? He's good. He's been going to preschool and he has friends, and he loves heroes. Oh God, you wouldn't believe, he has this notebooks. He might even have you in it. Hisashi, I'm afraid Chief Tsuragami isn't that interested in the details. Shoyuta interrupted Hisashi, who had gone to, we are so proud of our son, rampage. No, I'm happy to hear about the little pup. Glad to know everything is going well, Tsuragami assured with a smile. Yes, well, even so we do have a bit more serious thing to tell you, Shoyuta said. I see, then what is it? Shoyuta and Hisashi glanced at each other briefly. Izuku got his quirk the day before, Shoyuta said. Tsuragami raised his eyebrows but didn't otherwise interrupt. The manifested? Izuku, Shoyuta coughed and sat up straighter, a little confused as to why he was hesitating. Izuku can take quirks. Chief Tsuragami had a very good poker face, but even he couldn't help the little tells of his shock. His chin lifted a little and his eyes rounded in shock for a moment before he collected himself and took on a more neutral look, sitting back in his chair and looking at Aizawa and Yamada sternly. How exactly did Izuku's quirk manifest? He asked. We were playing, Izuku and I, and we were, in the middle of a screaming match. Hisashi said, his cheeks reddening slightly. I was using my quirk and then Izuku. He took my quirk without realizing it at first, and then he got upset when he realized that he now had my quirk and I didn't, but he gave it back as soon as he calmed down. Hisashi rushed to add, as if afraid of someone judging Izuku before getting the whole story. I have my quirk back now and it works perfectly. Izuku won't be abusing this quirk, I assure you, Chief Tsuragami. But seeing as this is the biggest lead we've got since getting Izuku as to who might his biological parents be, we thought we ought to tell you, Aizawa finished. Tsuragami hummed after a moment of silence. I guess I have something to share with you. Will you excuse for a moment? Yes, sure, Aizawa answered, a little confused as Chief Tsuragami got up and started walking to the door. Shoyuta and Hisashi exchanged baffled glances. What do you think it is? Hisashi asked as they were left alone in the room. I think he knows something. Knows who Izuku's biological parents are, Shoyuta answered and was scowling at the empty seat behind the table. He and Hisashi fell into silence for the lasting few minutes it took for Tsuragami to come back, with a new person. Aizawa-san, Yamada-san, may I introduce you to Detective Tsukachi Naomasa. Detective Tsukachi here are the pro-heroes Eraserhead and Present Mike. They got up to shake hands with the detective as the chief rounded the table and sat behind his desk once more. Detective Tsukachi rounded the table too but was left standing next to him. It's nice to meet you both, Tsukachi greeted. Detective, I've just been informed that the baby we discovered from the villain hideout bust case from 3 years ago has finally developed his quirk. Chief Tsuragami started. Aizawa and Hisashi tensed up a little as they realized their son's quirk would be revealed to this new person next. The baby, Izuku, was adopted by these two, and apparently Izuku's quirk is about being able to take quirks from other people to himself, and also the power to return them. Detective Tsukachi was much worse at keeping his poker face than Tsuragami had been. He visibly took a gasp of breath as his eyes were filled with shock. Shoyuta squinted his eyes at him suspiciously. His protective dad instinct rising up, ready to defend his son if this person decided to start throwing accuses of how dangerous this quirk could be. He didn't though, because there was also a part of him that sensed that Tsukachi's shock wasn't due to that but something else. You two know something. Tell us, Aizawa demanded. The two police officers shared a look. Right? I suppose that's why I'm here, Tsukachi started. Approximately 3 years ago there was a villain that was defeated by All Might. Both Shoyuta and Hisashi were keenly alert and listening to every word the detective said. Shuta's eyebrows lifted at hearing the name All Might. This villain was called All for One, for his quirk allowed him to take any quirk from anybody by touch and keep them to himself or pass them on to other people. How come we haven't ever heard of such a villain before? That kind of quirk used badly, Hisashi asked. That's because he was much older than you think. He had been operating since quirks started manifesting, but after the heroes started to rise, he hid himself under the radar and was operating behind the scenes. Was operating? You are saying that he isn't alive anymore? Shoyuta inquired and glanced from the detective to the chief. There was never a body we could find. But we have stayed alert since All Might defeated him and we haven't found anything. For all appearance and purposes, yes. We are assuming that he's dead. Tsukachi stated. But you can't be sure. Unfortunately, no, we can't be sure. We don't have a body to prove it, Tsukachi answered Aizawa with a sigh. There's something else you might want to see, Chief Tsuragami interrupted. Shoyuta and Hisashi turned to him to see him turning his computer screen towards them. We weren't able to find this at the first investigation, but our second investigation during the demolition of the villain hideout discovered us this video footage. Tsuragami told and hit play on a video that was on fast forward. It was from the nursery, and it covered a PRD of 1 week. There was only one angle and one person that showed up on the footage. As if on clockwork, Shoyuta and Hisashi finally witnessed a person coming into view and lifting Izuku from the crib. There was never anyone else but this person and Izuku seen in the footage, and we haven't been able to identify the man. He never turns towards the camera. He's only ever seen taking the baby out of the crib for a PRD of 5 to 30 minutes before returning him back. This pattern repeats itself for approximately 4 times a day. You're saying that this is a video footage of Izuku, and that monster that was taking care of him only came to see him 4 times a day? Yamada said, and his voice was strained by outrage as he tried to control his anger. Yes. And seeing as there were nobody else visiting Izuku, we have concluded that the other man might have been the only one aware of Izuku's existence. No villain we captured revealed any kind of knowledge about a baby in the hideout as we interrogated them. Hisashi's hands were squeezing into fists as he stared at the video footage playing before them. They could see a dark figure of a man coming, lifting Izuku from the crib, disappearing out of the frame for a moment before returning him into the crib and leaving. Shoyuta stared at the fast-forwarding clock in the corner, watching as it ticked on for hours without anyone checking up on Izuku all alone in the dimly lit room. At times they could see Izuku's silhouette rise to a sitting position and his hands to grab the bars of the crib, but it was too blurry to see his facial expressions. Shoyuta took Hisashi's hand and squeezed slightly. "Why weren't we told about this before? Why didn't you show this to us before?" Aizawa demanded to know. As I said, this footage wasn't found until the second investigation of the place since it was very well hidden. And the footage barely has any new information, so I exercised my judgment from keeping you from seeing it since it could only upset you. Then why are you showing it to us now? I figured it would be best in the light of our new information. Shoyuta and Hisashi gave confused looks to the chief. Unfortunately, we can't test it, but it seems that the evidence points to Izuku being all for one's biological son, given the similarities of their quirks. The location of the hideout matches with some of the intel about his possible operations at the time, and given that all might happen to defeat him just as we found Izuku, and no bone has tried to hound Izuku. If our assessment is correct and the person seen on this footage is also the only person who knew about Izuku, then it seems that the person in the footage might be all for one himself. And since he is, presumably, dead, he therefore hasn't been able to even try and get Izuku back. It does seem to line up perfectly, Aizawa agreed with a sigh and looked to Hisashi. We finally know who Izuku's biological father is. They returned back home with a lot on their mind and a tense silence surrounding them. When they stepped inside their home, they heard steps coming their way and soon Namuri was there to greet them. "Hi you guys. How did it go?" she asked. "I guess," Shoyuta answered, shrugging off his jacket. "How did you guys do? Everything went smoothly?" "Yes, of course. Izuku was a sweetheart like he always is," Namuri said with a dopey smile and resting his cheek on his clasped hands. "We drew a lot and hung out and stuff. You guys just took it while, so he's already in bed," she told them, and her voice got a little quieter towards the end. "I'm gonna go to the bathroom, be right back," Hisashi told before slipping past them. Shoyuta was staring at Namuri with scrunched-up eyebrows. "Namuri? Is everything all right?" Yes, everything is all right, it's just," Namuri sighed. "Izuku was as polite and wonderful as he always is, but I also noticed," Namuri hesitated for a moment. "You noticed what?" He wasn't himself tonight. He didn't want to play heroes, he was quieter, like sure he still mutters almost like normal but more quiet, and he didn't want to go on and on about heroes, and I noticed that whenever I got too close, he would step back or lean away like he was afraid of touching me. Izuku is usually so happy to see me, and we play and laugh and it's wonderful, but tonight." Shoyuta squeezed Namuri's shoulder in comfort. "Don't worry, it wasn't about you. He's still adjusting to finding out about his quirk. Right?" "Of course," Namuri agreed and smiled. "Well, I'd better get going now since you guys are back and it's getting late. Remember to invite me over other than for babysitting at times, you know?" she said with a teasing tilt while pulling her coat on her shoulders. Shoyuta smiled, but he had a heavy, uncomfortable feeling growing in his gut. He had noticed Izuku backing away from his touch too today while he was watching him as Hisashi was at work. And Izuku hadn't wanted to play heroes either. Which wasn't completely unheard of but pretty close these past few months. "Shoyuta," Namuri said, and he raised his gaze back to her. She hesitated for a bit. "Take care of him?" Shoyuta gave her a smile and nodded. "We will. He's safe with us." Shoyuta had still a hero shift that night, so he just changed into his hero gear, took a bite of food, and went to give Izuku a kiss to the cheek before leaving. Fortunately, it was a quite standard night, and it didn't stretch necessarily. Shoyuta was back at home before 4 a.m. and he crashed to bed quite fast. The next morning, all was right with the world. Hisashi woke up the first and witnessed Shoyuta to be completely dead to the world. He gave his boyfriend with a bird's nest of bed hair a kiss to the cheek with a chuckle and got up to go cook some breakfast. At some point while cooking some scrambled eggs, their son emerged from his room. Equally out of it like his not a morning person would. Izuku had wild, untamed hair and he waddled over to the table to instantly rest his head on the table. Hisashi just shook his head amusedly. Izuku was fed some breakfast and then since he was still all sleepy, Hisashi figured he could just point Izuku to their bed so he and Shoyuta could continue sleeping instead of both of them having to get up because he was leaving for work. Hisashi left their home to the image of Shoyuta and Izuku peacefully sleeping together in their bed. Shoyuta in turn eventually woke up to Izuku poking his dad on the cheek. He opened his tired and just a bit too dry eyes to Izuku only a few inches from his face and sunshine lighting up Izuku's hair to look a much brighter green than usual. Izuku startled back when he saw his dad opening his eyes. Shoyuta groaned quietly, still yearning for sleep but accepting his fate. 5 more minutes, Izuku. Tell Papa I'll be up in a moment and that he can go already. Papa left already. It's almost 1 p.m. already, Izuku giggled, finding his daddy to be silly at the moment. Shoyuta turned his head so he could see the digital clock next to his bed on the other side and realized that Izuku was speaking the truth. All right then. Shoyuta dragged himself out of the sweet, warm and soft bed. He could go with a bit firmer one, but Hisashi really liked soft mattresses. Izuku waited patiently for his dad sitting on the bed. Shoyuta collected his mess of a hair into a messy bun and headed for the kitchen. Time for his breakfast and Izuku's lunch? It was quite a normal day for them. Completely normal, in fact. To the inexperienced eye at least. But Shoyuta was trained to notice every detail, even outside of work. And he didn't miss the way Izuku avoided any and all skin contact. The way he would lean away if you got too close, and if he went to ruffle Izuku's hair, Izuku would duck his head, and when he was handing something to him, Izuku would make sure their hands just wouldn't touch at any point. Shoyuta noted all these little things but decided to stay quiet for now. See if Izuku just needed a bit time before he figured things out himself and became more comfortable with touching again. Shoyuta was all for boundaries and consent, but it was just that this wasn't usual for Izuku. Izuku loved hugs and playing, and hair ruffles would make him beam, and he might hung on you like a cloak, trying and succeeding to plead with his puppy eyes anyone to play heroes. Izuku would offer his cheek for a cheek kiss and even give one back. He would giggle like crazy when he got to take Shoyuta by hands and wall climb Shuta's legs and chest with his little feet, doing a somersault at the end to get back on his 2 feet. The absence of all these things was quite jarring. The day went by without playing hero with Izuku, and soon enough Hisashi came back, and it was Shuta's turn to go to work. That night Hisashi hugged himself to Shoyuta. His eyes were glimmering with tears, and he sniffed quietly. Izuku don't want me to touch him anymore. He keeps flinching away, he whispered sadly, and a lone tear rolled to Shuta's chest. Shoyuta softly stroked Hisashi from his hair to his back in a soothing manner. He just needs a bit time to adjust. He's still figuring out his quirk and he doesn't feel sure whether or not he can control it. I feel like this is my fault. Like he hates me. It's not, and he does not. Izuku loves you and you know it, Shoyuta answered sternly but gently. Hisashi sighed. I do know that. I just can't stop. Shoyuta turned Hisashi's chin upwards, so he could look at Hisashi to the eyes and show his conviction. We love Izuku and he loves us. We just need to give him some time. Hisashi nodded and snuggled closer to Shoyuta, pressing his ear above Shuta's chest. The next day Izuku was drawing on the kitchen table when Shoyuta decided to turn off his hero paperwork for now and go and kneel beside Izuku. He gently pulled the pen from Izuku's hand, placing it on the table and then taking both of Izuku's hands in his and forcing him to look at himself. He noticed that Izuku's shoulders were now tensed up. Izuku, we need to talk. About what, daddy? Izuku asked, and there was clear fear in his eyes from seeing his dad so serious. About this, Izuku, Shoyuta said, nodding to their joined hands. About you being afraid to touch us anymore. What's going on there? Can you tell me? Shoyuta inquired and tried to convey trust and safety in his eyes. Izuku looked at his dad and then at his lap. I just don't. I don't want to take your quirk by accident, Izuku mumbled and avoided Shuta's gaze. Are you taking my quirk now? Shoyuta asked. No. How about now? Shoyuta asked and moved Izuku's hands so that they were cupping his cheeks. After a moment Izuku turned his eyes to Shoyuta a little panicked and then stared confused at Shoyuta when he realized his daddy's eyes were now red and his hair was floating. Daddy's quirk disappeared, Izuku said worriedly. I think you've got that mixed out green bean, Shoyuta said good-naturedly and gave his son a smirk. I think it's you who's missing a quirk, but how did you know that exactly? I couldn't feel your quirk anymore. Is that so? Then there's more to your quirk than just taking and giving, isn't there? Shoyuta said and finally deactivated his quirk. His hair flowed back to gravity's will and his eyes turned back to the familiar dark color filled with love for Izuku. Izuku, my doesn't just pop up without me calling for it. I can deactivate it and activate it, and I'm not just erasing everybody's quirks all the time by accident. Do you feel like your quirk is actively trying to pull other people's quirks to you without you wanting it? Are you a quirk magnet? No. And if you do accidentally take someone's quirk without meaning to, are you unable to give it back? No. I gave Papa his quirk back, Izuku admitted quietly once again. Shoyuta sighed and smiled gently at Izuku. Izuku, look, I understand that you're scared and sometimes you just can't help being scared. It must have been very scary for you to accidentally take Papa's quirk when you didn't mean to. Shoyuta cupped Izuku's cheek as Izuku gave a small nod. But Izuku, you must understand that your quirk doesn't control you. You control your quirk and you're allowed to make mistakes while you learn to control it. Izuku was staring at his daddy's eyes, scared and unsure but pleading for reassurance. But Izuku, being scared of your own quirk is the surest way to lose that control. You keep holding and holding your quirk back, then there's no telling what could happen when you finally can't do it anymore. You have to learn to accept your quirk and not be afraid of it, even if you will never use it. But how? Shoyuta gave a thoughtful sound as he stared their clasped hands thoughtfully. How about you try your quirk now? You can take my quirk and then take it back, he suggested with a head tilt and a questioning eyebrow. Izuku's eyes widened in shock. I can't. What if I can't give it back? You can. And you will. Izuku, I trust you. Izuku stared at their hands with doubt and Shoyuta squeezed Izuku's hands in reassurance. You can do it, Izuku. Izuku nodded and Shoyuta waited patiently. Izuku closed his eyes and they stayed there, quiet and unmoving, for a while as Izuku tried out to use his quirk on Shudis. Shoyuta couldn't say he particularly felt it. It was almost surprising how little he could even feel it. Shoyuta wondered if the brief warmth he felt was something he just imagined or not. The only reason he even noticed he didn't have his quirk anymore was that he was actively trying to feel his quirk. And when that almost unconscious switch he used to activate and deactivate his quirk disappeared, he knew Izuku had done it. Shoyuta also belatedly noticed that his felt different. Better. Slightly less dry and tired. There you go. Shoyuta encouraged and smiled at Izuku. How does it feel? Izuku blinked at his father and gave a shrug. Can you use it? Can you sense how you can activate and deactivate it? Izuku's eyebrows scrunched up as he focused, and a moment later Izuku's hair started floating slightly and his eyes turned red. Shoyuta smiled proudly. Great! You are doing it! He cheered. Now you had some problems controlling the voice quirk before because you were upset and new to it. But can you deactivate the erasure quirk without a problem? Izuku nodded and then his hair floated back down, as much as it could anyway. That thing liked to defy gravity at times, and his eyes turned back to their bright green color. See how you can activate and deactivate it at will? It doesn't just do it by itself. Yeah, Izuku agreed. Do you think you're ready to try returning the erasure quirk now? You don't have to, you can keep it for now if you want. Freak out Papa with it when he comes back home, Shoyuta smirked. Izuku looked unsure again. I want to give it back now. Okay, but there's no hurry. Just give yourself some time and relax. Take a deep breath and then focus, you can do it. Izuku gave his dad a small smile and a nodded, then he once again closed his eyes to focus. Shoyuta waited patiently as Izuku did his thing. When Izuku opened his eyes and smiled with the brightness of a million suns, Shoyuta didn't even need to feel his quirk to know that Izuku had given it back. I did it. Yes, you did. Great work, Izuku. I'm so proud of you. Shoyuta announced proudly and with a huge grin. After a moment, Shoyuta sobered down a bit once again and smiled gently at Izuku while softly stroking his thumb over Izuku's cheek. Promise me you will try to understand your quirk from now instead of being afraid it? I miss my Izuku hugs. Shura's cruelly trained hero reflexes came to use when he only had a moment to prepare before Izuku launched himself at Shoyuta and clung tightly to his father, burying his face to Shura's neck. Shoyuta heard a sniff next to his ear and a quiet, "I will, daddy. I promise." Shoyuta gently hugged Izuku back with a smile and smoothed down his hand down Izuku's back. "That's my boy." Hisashi almost started crying when that night while he was hanging out with Izuku while Shoyuta was at work, Izuku approached him and shyly asked him if they could play heroes. Whatever Hisashi had been doing was forgotten immediately as he jumped up in excitement and cheered an enthusiastic, "Yeah." Hisashi kept feeling bursts of love when he and Izuku fooled around, making dramatic speeches of villainy and heroics, chasing each other and Hisashi tickling Izuku and throwing him gently around and flying him above his head. The burst just went through him and squeezed his heart with warmth and joy so deeply that at times he couldn't help but clutch his chest to try and contain the feeling before it made his heart explode. Don't ask him how, but he and Izuku ended up in an unofficial screaming match again. It may have started while Izuku was chasing him and then they just tried to one-up one another and then they laughed until their bellies hurt, and they had to collapse on the sofa to catch their breath. Observing Izuku, it was getting apparent that he was wearing out and would soon need to go to bed already. Just watching Izuku made a wave of love wash over Hisashi once again, and he didn't even try to control himself when he scooped Izuku into his lap to hug as tightly as he could. He was starving for Izuku hugs after 2 days without them. Don't judge him. "Papa, I can't breathe," Izuku squeezed out from where he was buried in Hisashi's arms. Hisashi loosened his hold just a little as not to strange his son but still didn't let Izuku free. "Papa," Izuku giggled. Hisashi did finally release Izuku from his hug, but Izuku stayed in his lap and was resting himself on Hisashi's chest while he caught his breath. The next burst of love was so strong that Hisashi had to take a deep breath so he wouldn't burst into tears and freak Izuku out. He was so happy. Izuku was starting to feel really tired, and he closed his eyes and felt calmness wash over him from hearing Papa's heartbeat and feeling his warmth under him. Daddy was right, just touching wasn't doing anything. He could sense his Papa's quirk safely on Papa's throat and it wasn't going anywhere without him actively trying to take it. It felt interesting to feel Papa's quirk. It was different from Daddy's. Daddy's quirk was mostly in his eyes while Papa's was in his throat. They both seemed to spread wider, reaching all the way to the part that thoughts came from according to grown-ups. Aunt Nemuri's quirk had felt different too. Spread over almost her whole body and less intense compared to Papa's. It wasn't about just where they were located either. They worked differently, there was parts in them that made them work like they did. There, lying on his Papa's chest, Papa's quirk was so close that there was so much that he was now noticing about it, all these different things, an ensemble that made a whole. Izuku couldn't place the feeling and description of what quirks felt like to anything he had ever experienced before, but he did feel them, and he was starting to recognize all these parts and features. Daddy had said that there was more to his quirk than just the ability to take and give them. And there wasn't there? He could understand them. It was still all confusing and he couldn't quite connect the dots, but it was there. He felt them and he could also understand them. If he could understand other people's quirks, couldn't he also understand his own? He must be able to feel it if he tried. Izuku closed his eyes and tried to search inside himself something like Papa's quirk. Where could his be? In his hands? In his thoughts? At first Izuku wasn't exactly sure where he found it. But it was there, and he probed at it. It almost felt like someone was pouring water through his body with how it seemed to spread from his head to everywhere, getting thinner the further down he got. Returning back to his head where he could feel it the strongest, Izuku turned and wondered at it, trying to make sense of all its parts and what they were. How did it work? What exactly was his quirk? It was almost strange how understanding seemed to flow through him even before words could form them into sentences. There was more to his quirk. Hisashi startled slightly when Izuku sat upright all of a sudden with a shocked look in his eyes. For a moment he thought that maybe Izuku had accidentally taken his quirk again, but no, it was still there. He could still feel that he was able to use his quirk if he wanted to. What is it, Izuku? Izuku blinked his eyes dumbfoundedly and tilted his head slightly while his mouth opened, but words didn't come out, like he was confused as to what to say exactly. I did something, Izuku said, and he still seemed confused even at himself. What did you do, Izuku? Hisashi asked. Izuku frowned and moved to go sit next to Hisashi on the sofa instead of sitting in his lap. He got that look of Izuku concentration, and Hisashi waited patiently. Then Izuku got a little smirk on his lips, and he looked at his papa coyly. I bet you can't scream this loudly, he stated, and then Izuku continued on to scream with all his little lungs were worth, and the scream was amplified like with the voice quirk. Hisashi blinked dumbfoundedly at Izuku, because he could still feel his quirk, but Izuku just used it? Hisashi shook. The shock from him to give Izuku a remark. Oh yeah, trying to be a big shot there, are we? Just see how the professional does it. The following scream was very much amplified with the voice quirk. Izuku beamed. No, I can scream the loudest. Hey. Big talk for such a little guy, heh. Then both Hisashi and Izuku were screaming at each other with the voice-amplified quirks. The resulting backwards move made them both topple over on the sofa, resulting in laughter. Izuku, how did you do that? Hisashi asked in wonder. I made a copy, Izuku announced and threw his hands up in excitement. Hisashi was so proud of Izuku and loved his so much that he just couldn't control the happy tears anymore. Shoyuta came back early, for his standards at least, but it certainly wasn't early enough to justify that his 4-year-old son was still up and so excited that he was almost vibrating through the floor. Daddy, I learned a new trick. Is this what you call a child that's in his bed by bedtime? Shoyuta asked Hisashi, who at least looked a little abashed. You try and get him calmed down, I dare you, Hisashi sighed, whispered back, giving a pointed look to Izuku, who was literally running and jumping around. Well, what trick did you learn, Izuku? Shoyuta asked amusedly and shook his head. I can do quirk copies, Izuku announced with a voice-amplified voice. Izuku burst into laughter from the following dumbfounded look on his dad's face. Shoyuta turned to look at Hisashi so as to confirm that he truly still had his quirk. Hisashi understood this and nodded with a proud smile. Wow, Izuku, that's great. I know, right? What had started amplified suddenly went back to a normal voice in the middle, and Izuku was left staring ahead confusedly. Izuku? Hisashi asked carefully, not sure what just happened. It broke, Izuku said, surprised. His two fathers didn't really have any time to respond before Izuku rolled into a muttering storm, stroking his chin in thought with Izuku's look of deep concentration on his face. Quirk copies must be different from quirks and won't last forever. Maybe there's a time limit or something and they will disappear after a certain time? Or maybe… Shoyuta and Hisashi glanced at each other a little helplessly, not sure how to proceed. I need to go write this down, Izuku announced and was almost running off already before Shoyuta stopped him. Hey now mister. Your bedtime has gone a long time ago. I understand that you are excited, but you need to go to bed. After all, you can only wake up on your birthday morning if you sleep before it. Oh? Izuku said, and you could see it from his face that he had completely forgotten that the next day would be his birthday. So go. Brush your teeth and then I will come read you a bedtime story, all right? It wasn't easy getting an overexcited toddler to calm down and go to sleep. Fortunately for Shoyuta, Izuku was also exhausted from the long day and heavy playtime. So eventually he managed. There was one good thing in Izuku stretching his bedtime. Shoyuta wasn't usually there when Izuku was going to bed, so getting to read him a bedtime story, about heroes, was a rare treat which he strangely enough enjoyed immensely. Who wouldn't when Izuku looked like an angel once he finally did fall asleep? Happy birthday to you, started Hisashi and Shoyuta together, Hisashi much louder and more enthusiastic while Shoyuta was still trying to get his brain to catch up to being awake. Hisashi was carrying a tray with waffles, hot chocolate with whipped cream, and 2 small presents. Izuku had been still asleep before they opened his door and started singing, and he was now slowly rousing up awake, just a bit confused and groggy. Happy birthday, dear Izuku, happy birthday to you. They finished just as Izuku was sitting up and rubbing his eyes. Shoyuta straightened Izuku's blanket so that the tray could be placed above his lap. Izuku stared at the ensemble for a moment before looking up at his parents. Hizashi had gotten a place to sit at the foot of Izuku's bed while Shoyuta pulled Izuku's chair from his desk to sit beside the bed instead of awkwardly standing there and looming over him. "Morning, green salad, happy birthday," Shoyuta said and ruffled Izuku's hair. Izuku beamed. "You're 4 now. My little boy is starting to be so big already," Hizashi wailed while wiping crocodile tears from his eyes. Shoyuta kicked Hizashi gently when it looked like he would make Izuku cry too. "Yes, you are turning 4 now. We will have lots of stuff to do today and tomorrow you can go back to preschool once again," Shoyuta said. "Don't you have to go to work?" Izuku asked with a sleepy voice. "Of course not, we've got the whole day off for your 4th birthday," Hizashi smiled. "Oh okay," Izuku smiled. "Now, how about you open your presents first and then you can eat your breakfast in bed." Izuku seemed to become more alert and excited at the mention of presents. Shoyuta was already handing him one with a chuckle. It was wrapped in simple green wrapping paper with white strings. Izuku first removed the string very carefully and then the paper equally carefully, trying not to tear it. Shoyuta exchanged an amused glance with Hizashi while he was at it. Finally, Izuku managed to unveil the present, which happened to be an All Might-themed notebook. Izuku gasped in delight. "I can start writing my quirk notes in this." At least Izuku was easy to please. The next present was a collection of action figures, some new rising hero stars. Shoyuta wasn't even sure who, but Izuku exclaimed all their names in delight. "There's still one present but it didn't fit on the tray," Shoyuta said while raising the soft and a bit roundish packet to Izuku's eager hands. Izuku unwrapped it with everlasting carefulness to reveal an All Might One Piece. Izuku was so excited about that one that Shoyuta had to tell him that he couldn't put it on right away. "You don't want it to get accidentally dirty, do you?" "No," Izuku conceded but was still needily staring at the clothing. "So, how about you finish your breakfast now and then you can come and put it on," Shoyuta said while rising up. Izuku suddenly looked a bit panicked and sad. "You're leaving?" Shoyuta and Hizashi exchanged glances that kind of had been the plan. But Izuku's kicked puppy look was too powerful. "I'm just going to get some coffee for me and Papa," Shoyuta answered. And that's how all 3 ate breakfast in Izuku's bed that morning. Shoyuta sipping his coffee while Hizashi went on and on about some funny hero story and giggled so much that he came close to getting his hot chocolate back through his nose. Izuku put on the All Might One Piece the moment he was done with breakfast, and he looked way too cute in it. Shoyuta felt a little grumpy about it since it still wasn't his preference to have his son be such an All Might fanboy. Izuku got measured how tall he was now at 4 years old to a door frame where his 1, 2, and 3-year heights were already. Hizashi almost started crying again seeing how much Izuku had already grown from when they got him. Nemuri joined them soon after with a big present from her carried in her hands. "How's my favorite nephew?" she exclaimed. "Aunt Nemuri!" Izuku yelled in excitement and ran to give her a hug around the legs. Nemuri raised a happy smile to Shoyuta and Shoyuta grinned back. Hell yeah, Izuku was back to normal. "Is that for me?" Izuku asked in wonder and Nemuri nodded, kneeling to Izuku's level and handing him the packet with a smile. "Happy birthday, Izuku," she exclaimed and got a new excited hug from Izuku who was practically vibrating from excitement. Didn't stop him from carefully taking off the wrapper again. Shoyuta couldn't at first see just what was being unveiled from the present, but Izuku let out the biggest gasp and then screamed like a stereotypical little girl in excitement. Shoyuta raised his eyebrows in part shock and curiosity, looking at Nemuri. "What on earth did you get him?" "You'll see," Nemuri answered while gesturing to Izuku who was taking off the All Might One Piece, in a hurry. Next pulling on something colored in black in return. A small, "Oh?" escaped Shuta's lips as positively beaming Izuku turned to him, and he had a really familiar-looking outfit on. "It's Daddy's hero costume." Izuku screeched and was actually jumping up and down in happiness. "I love it! Illivite, 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 Illivite." "Thank you, Aunt Nemuri." Izuku hugged her again, still jumping up and down. "There's also a present mic version in the packet. I had them specially ordered," Nemuri stated with a smug grin. Shoyuta felt frozen from seeing just how happy a present like this was making Izuku. A present about his hero persona. He also noted that the present had the present mic-themed black outfit with white shoulder details and the voice amplifier detailed in the collar. The hood had earphones and piece resembling Hisashi's crazy hairdo while he was present mic. And then the same packet had the Eraserhead-themed one piece that was now being proudly worn by his son. It was mostly black as well, but it had a pattern around the shoulder area to represent his signature capture weapon, the white scarf, and then it had the familiar yellow goggles on the hood. Let's play heroes. Eraserhead and Eraser Boy versus Aunt Nemuri and Papa. Izuku cheered. Shoyuta felt weak at hearing his son wanting to be Eraser Boy while wearing his hero outfit-themed outfit. All three adults were too weak to say no to Izuku and they ended up playing one of the wildest hero plays. It was Izuku and Shoyuta as the heroes, Nemuri as the civilian and Hisashi as the bad guy. "You will never stop me," Hisashi declared proudly. Shoyuta felt a bit worried about their apartment since it seemed like quirks were getting mixed up in the playing once again. "Oh, somebody save me. Won't you save me?" Nemuri wailed in a theatrical fashion. "We will," Izuku yelled back. "Go, Eraserhead." Shoyuta played along, even activating his quirk on Hisashi. "It's over now, villain. Surrender now. You can't use your quirk if you can't see me," Hisashi stated while covering Shuta's eyes with his hands. Izuku giggled wildly and Shoyuta decided to play along even though he could use his quirk on Hisashi since he could still see some part of him, only without light and from very, very close from his eyes. They were playing after all. He didn't need to be too strict. Shoyuta felt Izuku taking his hand from hidden behind him. "But Eraser Boy will." Izuku had jumped on Hisashi, giggling wildly while his hair was floating, and his eyes were shining red. Hisashi had to remove his hand from Shuta's eyes to catch Izuku. "You have been captured, villain," Izuku declared, and Hisashi was smiling while he wailed, "Oh no! How could this be?" Shoyuta noticed Nemuri staring at Izuku with surprise, and he gave her a reassuring smile. Right? Izuku's quirk was still new to her. It was new for Shoyuta too to have his quirk copied by Izuku. Shoyuta shook his head with a smile while he watched his giggling son and boyfriend hugging each other tightly. "Now who's captured?" "You are." Izuku laughed. God, he was happy seeing Izuku so happy. They eventually managed to take a break from playing. Hisashi had went with Izuku to the bathroom to wash their hands before they would enjoy some of Izuku's birthday cake. Shoyuta gave a brief explanation about Izuku's quirk's new developments to Nemuri while the other two were still out of room. "Oh, that's really something, that quirk." All Shoyuta did was hum in agreement while he was setting the table. "But I'm really glad to see Izuku is back to his normal happy self again. It was really uncomfortable seeing him so. Well, you know." "Yeah, I do. By the way, I can't believe you managed to beat Hisashi and me with the present giving." Like sure, Izuku was happy about his new All Might-themed notebook and the action figures of some heroes, and the All Might One Piece had him so excited, "But you beat them all." "What can I say? I know my nephew. He might be an All Might fanboy, but really, he is the true #1 fan of Eraserhead and present Mike. Especially Eraserhead since there's so little merchandise of him." Shota couldn't help the proud grin breaking on his lips. "I guess so. Who's ready for some cake?" Hisashi asked while coming to the kitchen, carrying Izuku in a piggyback ride. "I am." Izuku was placed to the chair on the head of the table, before the handsome birthday cake with 4 candles. "But first you need to blow out the candles and make a wish." "But wait, just let Papa get the camera ready." "'Kay, Papa's ready. Go, Izuku. Make a wish and blow the candles out." Izuku gasped in air until his little lungs were full and his cheeks were round, then he leaned in, blowing the 4 candles out with all his might. He got them all snuffed out and a proud wide smile spread on his lips as they all clapped their hands at him. They enjoyed the cake, made by Hisashi, and then Nemuri started giving her goodbye, stating that she still had work that day unfortunately. "That's okay, we actually still have a doctor's appointment to get to today as well." "We do." "Yes, Izuku, to register your quirk before you start school," Shoyuta answered. "But I haven't even started my notes yet," Izuku exclaimed, and then he was rushing off to his room, coming back a moment later with the All Might-themed notebook and a pen. I need to start right away so I'm prepared, Izuku stated while he was settling in on the kitchen table, opening up the first page of the book. He's excited, Nemuri chuckled. Yep. Well, anyway I'm off. Bye Zuzu. Nemuri yelled to the kitchen. Bye Aunt Nemuri. Izuku managed to yell back and briefly flashed her a beaming smile before turning back to focus on his notes. Nemuri chuckled one more time before she was out the door. Izuku ended up getting enough time to write at least a satisfactory amount before having to go. We can do something fun after the doctor's appointment, Hisashi told. What would you want to do, Izuku? I don't know. We could go see something for example? Oh, can we go see villain fights live? Izuku suggested in excitement. Hisashi said eloquently while he and Shoyuta exchanged worried glances. Villain fights weren't exactly the safest place to take a 4-year-old and tracking them wasn't exactly consistent either. How about a movie? Or going to the zoo? Hisashi tried to propose in return. The zoo has penguins, Shoyuta added. The zoo could be fun, Izuku agreed thoughtfully. The zoo it is, Shoyuta announced before Izuku could change his mind and demand more villain fight sightseeing. They arrived at the doctor's office and Izuku walked between them, holding both their hands. Izuku was dismissing the opportunity to play with the waiting room toys, instead deciding to go over his own quirk notes while they waited a couple minutes to be called upon to their appointment. Aizawa Yamada, a female doctor asked, and they got up to go with her, Shoyuta and Hisashi shaking hands with the doctor before entering the room. Izuku got a seat between his parents and the doctor pulled over a stool with wheels to sit before Izuku. Well, hi there. I'm Dr. Takahashi. If I understand correctly, you are Izuku? Yes. Nice to meet you, miss. Izuku greeted with a polite smile. Nice to meet you too. May I ask you some questions? Of course. That's great. How about you tell me how old you are? The doctor asked while clicking her ballpoint pen open and ready to write with. I turned 4 today. Oh, you did? Well, happy birthday. Thank you. And as I understand, you came here to register your quirk. Can you tell me about it a bit? At this the doctor glanced at Hisashi and Shoyuta too to signal that they could answer too if there was anything to add after Izuku. I got it. Izuku started counting fingers but seemed a bit confused, raising his gaze to his daddy. It manifested 5 days ago, Shoyuta filled in. Yeah, and I already know a lot about it. I still haven't figured out how the copies last and how they are different than quirks. They don't last forever, and I need to figure out what makes them break. Izuku was muttering and then stopped as Shoyuta placed a gentle hand to his shoulder. I'm not sure the doctor can understand your mumbling, Izuku, Shoyuta said gently. Right? Sorry, Izuku said, seeming a little bit embarrassed. It's okay, the doctor reassured. How about you specify a bit the aspects about your quirk? Okay. Then Izuku was opening up his notes reading straight from them. I think my quirk could be called Take, Give and Copy. Possibly TGC for shorts, although that's kind of dismissing the sense part. Maybe it should be TG.SC? Hisashi coughed a little and it seemed to shake Izuku away from the approaching muttering episode. Right, sorry. The as aspects are like these. Take for the ability to take another person's quirk. Then there is give for the ability to give the quirk back to the person. And then there's copy for the ability to copy a person's quirk without taking it. Izuku finished with a grin, raising his excited gaze to the doctor who had frozen for a moment, pen in hand, staring at Izuku. Well, that's quite a quirk, she said. Yeah. I can also sense other people's quirks and understand them. It's kind of confusing though, but I think I'll get better at it with time. How did this manifest exactly? The doctor asked. Izuku looked instantly a bit upset and his gaze lowered to the floor. At first, I accidentally took Papa's quirk, Izuku admitted. But then Izuku was able to return it shortly after. Hisashi filled in with a gentle smile and an encouraging rub of the back for Izuku. Yeah, and then Daddy let me try it out. Once again on his quirk. And Izuku had very good control over taking it, using it and then returning it, Shoyuta added. And then I discovered the copies. And I copied Papa's quirk. Izuku finished, excited once again. Right? The doctor was now writing down things on her clipboard. How about details? Do you know whether or not you can use your quirk from a distance? Huh. Izuku looked thoughtful at this. I'm not sure actually, I haven't tried yet. Well, the doctor smiled, you are here to figure out a bit more about your quirk today. Of course, you will get even more familiar with your quirk and learn new aspects of it over time, but we will see what we will discover today, shall we? Shoyuta and Hizashi agreed to be the test subjects to test Izuku's quirk. More specifically, it was going to be Shoyuta since his quirk was less disruptive being used. Izuku was standing a few meters away from his dad as he focused and then managed to take Shuta's erasure quirk. This time Shoyuta felt a bit more noticeable tug as it was removed, but it was still basically pain-free. Izuku demonstrated using it and then returning it from a distance as well. They repeated the experiment with Izuku copying Hizashi's quirk this time. He stated since the erasure quirk copy still hadn't disappeared from their earlier playtime, Izuku wanted to see how long it would last. Izuku wanted to copy Papa's quirk again after it had disappeared. It was apparently a bit more difficult since Izuku stated that he really needed to focus on the details, and it took a bit more effort from a distance, but he still did it. The doctor kept filling the quirk registration as they were testing, asking a few more questions for clarification every once in a while. Then finally she stated that she seemed to have everything she needed to fill out the registration for TGC. Better keep it simpler for saying purposes, right? And they were on their out. They ended up going to the zoo where Izuku got a burger and some fries and 100, or more, probably more, pictures of himself with all the animals. He especially liked the bird section where he stated that the cockatoos looked like Present Mike because of his hair. Shoyuta laughed so hard that his sides hurt. One of the memorable moments was when they happened to be seeing a dolphin show, and in the middle of it the showkeeper proposed his girlfriend right there in front of everybody, completed with the dolphin bringing the ring box for him. What's he doing? Izuku had asked. Proposing for his girlfriend, Shoyuta had answered. What's proposing? Izuku asked, raising his curious eyes to each of his fathers in turn. Proposing is when two people who are in a relationship love each other very, very much and decide to get married. The one proposing gives a ring for the other and then they exchange new rings at the wedding where they promise to love and be there for each other forever, Hizashi told. Oh, so have you proposed? Izuku asked way too innocently to be asking such a loaded question. Shoyuta and Hizashi tensed up and exchanged nervous glances. Oh, no, we haven't actually yet, Hizashi admitted. But why? You are in a relationship and love each other, right? You see, Izuku, we just haven't gotten around, Shoyuta was filling in. Don't you want to propose to Papa Daddy? Why yes. Of course, I do, Shoyuta admitted. This was a loaded conversation, and it was heading dangerously to directions where he and Hizashi would end up engaged in a noisy dolphin arena surrounded by strangers, without a ring and Shoyuta wasn't exactly the most romantic of people, but this wasn't the way he wanted to be proposing to his boyfriend. Oh, Izuku, look how the two dolphins jumped. Izuku turned his attention back to the show and Shoyuta sighed in relief after successfully distracting Izuku. He and Hizashi stayed a bit tensed up, though, because of the raised discussion. Izuku wasn't wrong though, what was stopping them from getting engaged? They didn't get back home until late that night and Izuku was so tired out from the day that he was out like a light once he finally got to bed. Teeth brushed and the Eraserhead one piece he had refused to change out of while they went outside changed to the Present Mike one piece that at least was cleaner. Hizashi demanded to take a photo of Izuku sleeping there with the Present Mike one piece on and looking like such an angel. Shoyuta started planning when he would go buy an engagement ring for Hizashi as they got to bed, and he got to pull him close. The next morning was a bit of a hassle since it had been a while since they had mornings where Izuku was supposed to go to preschool. Hizashi had to go to work, and Shoyuta was forced out from bed so he could take Izuku to school. They made through at least. At the car ride there, Shoyuta had a brief discussion with Izuku. Now Izuku, you can tell your friends about your quirk if you want to. But remember that quirk usage is forbidden in public. You shouldn't show off with your quirk or your copies, understand? Yes, Daddy. And if anyone gives you a hard time about your quirk, you will tell a teacher right away, won't you? Okay, Izuku agreed, a bit unsure. They were just pulling up at the parking lot and Shoyuta could park the car before turning to look at Izuku seated in the back seat. Izuku, people can be stupid sometimes. Prejudiced when they feel like it. Sometimes, when I was younger, people weren't so kind towards me because of my quirk. But Daddy is a hero. Izuku exclaimed in disbelief. Well, Daddy wasn't a hero just yet then. And people sometimes to accuse me of potentially using my quirk against them without them wanting to. But Daddy would never do that unless they were using their quirks badly, Izuku said. True, but sometimes prejudice rises up without proper reasons and actions supporting it. Usually from some unjustified fear. And you need to understand, Izuku, that it isn't ever okay if someone tries to put down someone just because of the quirk they possess. And if someone ever even tries to do that to you, you will tell a grown-up right away, right? Yes, Daddy. Izuku agreed but looked a bit down. After a moment of silence he asked unsurely, Do you think that people will be afraid of my quirk? The people who are smart will realize that there's nothing to be afraid of, and the ones who won't matter, Shoyuta stated. Because they are shitheads, Izuku mumbled in thought. What was that? Izuku smiled at his dad. Okay, I get it, Daddy. I will tell a teacher if anyone tries to bully me. Good boy, Shoyuta smirked. Differing from the first time Izuku had gone to preschool, this time Izuku was much more excited than nervous. Almost too excited to even say goodbye to his dad. Almost. He did give a tight hug to his daddy and an excited, "Love you," before he was already running off. Izuku was in a hurry to find Kaken. It had been so long since he last saw his friend and he was so excited to see him again and play with him and tell him about his quirk and everything. Kaken! Izuku exclaimed the moment he saw Kaken there, playing with action figures and cars while two other boys more like watched from his side. Kaken's head turned abruptly to Izuku's direction. Izuku! Kaken yelled in surprise. There was a brief moment where it seemed a smile would rise to Kaken's lips before a scowl took its place. Izuku reached the playing boys and plopped down to sit next to Katsuki. What took you so long? You've been gone for a forever, Kaken growled out in anger and was pulling away the toys as if he was afraid Izuku would reach out for them. I only got my quirk a while ago and my dads wanted me to be home until I did, Izuku answered with a bright smile, not swayed by Kaken's apparent hostility. How have you been? Kaken turned his angry glare to the two other boys. Scram! He growled out and the two looked so frightened that they obeyed immediately. The others aren't anything more than extras and don't even know any heroes beside All Might, who, is the best, but really? They are too stupid to fill their heads with anything else. Stupid extras, Kaken grumbled, then raised his glare to Izuku. So you got your quirk? What is it? He more like demanded than was just asking. Izuku hesitated for a moment, remembering his and his daddy's conversation. But this was Kaken, and Kaken was his friend, and he couldn't not tell Kaken. I named it TGC for take, give and see copy. I can take and copy other people's quirks, Izuku admitted, muttering a bit towards the end as unsureness compelled him. Katsuki stared long and hard at Izuku with a scowl, his head tilting, and his gaze glancing at the two other boys, who had escaped further and were still nervously staring at them, before his gaze returned back to Izuku. Kaken? Katsuki hummed in thought. Is it powerful? Oh, I don't know. Maybe? I think? I still need to study it to understand it better and figure out how I'm going to use it, but I'm going to become a hero with it, Izuku ended, and resolution made his voice more firm. Sure. Can you copy my quirk? Why yes, Izuku answered. Don't. Okay, Izuku agreed again and suddenly there was an action figure being shoved to his hands. Just remember that I will be the number one hero, Kaken grumbled. Izuku smiled coyly at Katsuki. Then you better be better than me because I'm going to give it my everything and I won't be easy to beat, Izuku stated. He got a grin and a look from Kaken that seemed to convey, challenge accepted, as Kaken smirked and said, you better. Shoyuta came back to an Izuku who could barely stop smiling. He was going mile a minute explaining everything about his day and about Kaken and about their playtimes, showing him a drawing he had taken with him. See, here's me and here's Kaken. We are heroes. I thought about getting a dark hero suit like Daddy and Papa have. Kaken wanted something explosive, so his is orange and red, see? Shoyuta hummed a confirmative answer while glancing at the drawing. Honestly, Izuku was going so fast, and his stories were so imaginative at times that he had trouble keeping up even though he tried to concentrate fully on Izuku. Izuku thought about so many details that he had something to talk about all the way to the car, to Shoyuta strapping him on the car seat, to Shoyuta starting the car and starting to head off. Hey Izuku, Shoyuta managed to interrupt at one point. Daddy has an errand to run, so we are heading off to the city first before going home, alright? Okay. A moment later, Shoyuta was getting an earful of Izuku's explanations again. Shoyuta managed to find a parking spot and they were walking hand in hand with Izuku. Izuku was starting to be more curious about his surroundings, so his babbling was starting to wind down. Where are we going, Daddy? He asked finally. To that little shop over there, in fact, you see it? Izuku was stretching out his neck and getting on his tiptoes as they walked closer to the jewelry shop. What are we doing here? Izuku asked as they were finally at the door and Shoyuta was opening it for them too. We are picking up an engagement ring for Hizashi, Shoyuta told. An engagement ring? Izuku asked as he started to stare in wonder at all the shiny jewelry on display. For proposing. At this, Izuku gasped and looked up to Shoyuta in wonder. You're gonna propose to Papa? It's still being planned, but yeah, I plan to propose to Papa. Will you help pick a pretty ring for Papa with me? Yeah. They ended up spending a while there, looking over all the rings, Shoyuta helping Izuku to see even the ones that were a bit high for him by lifting him to his arms. In the end, Izuku stated that he should get a gold ring since Papa's hair was gold too. Shoyuta figured a beautiful but more simple gold ring without any diamonds could be good for now. It was a bit safer to wear while at work, and Hizashi could always get the biggest rock he wanted in their wedding rings if he wanted one. The black ring box was safely secured into his pocket after purchase, and he and Izuku exited the shop again hand in hand. When are you gonna propose to Papa? Izuku asked in excitement. I don't know just yet. Papa likes to be romantic, and I think I should try to be as romantic as I can once I propose. Like in a dolphin show. Shoyuta chuckled incredulously. Sorry Izuku, but I don't think that's the most romantic place to propose. We will figure something else out. All right, Izuku replied cheerfully. They were now walking in a comfortable silence, and Shoyuta had to pull Izuku a bit at times when Izuku forgot to keep walking while he was window shopping. Shoyuta turned his gaze with a smile on his lips up to start looking for their car that should be right about here. It happened so suddenly that it just happened. All of a sudden there was a yank, and then Izuku's hand wasn't suddenly in his anymore. Shoyuta turned right away to look at his side where Izuku had been just a second ago. But he wasn't. There was nothing more than a brief breeze blowing his hair to his face as he frantically tried to turn this way and that to see Izuku somewhere. But he wasn't. Izuku! Shoyuta was panicking, looking one way and another. There was absolutely no sign of Izuku anywhere. Izuku was a quick child, sure, and easily pulled by things that interested him, but this wasn't that. Izuku's had been ripped away from his hold, and then he was just gone. This had been done by someone else. This had been done using a quirk. Someone had taken Izuku. Shoyuta forced himself to calm down, push away the fact that this was his child, his son. Someone kidnapped his son. Panicking wouldn't get him anywhere. He was a hero. He could push emotions away to act rationally. Shoyuta took his phone out from his pocket and with quick and precise few clicks he sent out an alert, alerting every hero nearby about a villain kidnapping and alerting every police station in the city. He included a photo of Izuku, his name only as Izuku, and his last known location and time. That done, Shoyuta pushed his phone back to his pocket. He didn't have a lot to go on, he hadn't seen anything. But he had felt a breeze, a sudden, unnatural breeze that had blew his hair to his face, meaning whatever had taken Izuku had come from behind and continued forward. It was the only direction he had. They had just been reaching their car too, Shoyuta thought bitterly as he ran to it, pulling the car door open. Just 1 minute more and Izuku would have been safely sitting in their car. The leather on the steering wheel made a scraping noise as Shuta's fists squeezed it with a white-knuckled grip. Shoyuta pretty much threw every driving rule out the window as he started speeding down the street with his car. He had his windows open to hear the outside better. Every intersection he quickly catalogued everything he saw, trying to find anything that could give him a hint as to where Izuku was. There was nothing. It had been barely 2 minutes since Izuku had been taken and Shoyuta had no lead where to go. That was until he heard it. Izuku didn't know what was happening. All he knew was that he had been with Daddy just a moment ago. He had been holding his hand while they walked the street, and Daddy made sure that he didn't forget himself at watching the window displays, especially when they walked past something that was hero-themed. Then all of a sudden, his hand was ripped away from Daddy's and everything went blurry. He was being jostled around and held painfully over his chest so he could barely breathe. The wind was blowing in his ears like crazy and he didn't know what was happening. Someone was carrying him. Someone was taking him. This someone was a stranger. Stop. Stop. There was a quirk working right next to him. It was blurry and fast and located especially on the person's legs. He didn't know what to do, he just wanted everything to stop. Where was his daddy? He wanted to get back to his daddy. Stop. Taking someone's quirk while it was being used didn't result in a smooth landing for anyone. Izuku and the person who had taken him stumbled to the ground, both rolling several times on the concrete road as the momentum was still affecting them. Izuku felt his wrist twist before his chin collided painfully with the ground, and then he was rolling and scraping and hitting so many places that he wasn't sure what hurt. Dizzy and disorientated, Izuku tried to sit up once he had finally stopped. His right wrist couldn't hold his weight at all, and even his leg was protesting at the small movement. His clothes were all torn and the skin beneath scraped bloody. Izuku was breathing heavily as he turned his gaze from one way to another, trying to take in his surroundings. He noticed a street sign at a corner of a block and a number next to it. "Daddy! Papa! Help me!" he screamed with all his strength and finished with the street name and number. But in his panic, he had put too much strain on the voice quirk copy, and with terror Izuku realized that he had broken it and he felt it disappear just as he noticed someone else getting up from the ground. "Fing sheet. What the hell? What the F dash? Where's my quirk?" The guy yelled, staring at his hands and legs like they had betrayed him. The guy looked surprisingly normal. He was wearing sweatpants and a hoodie. He was skinny and average height with short brown hair. The guy turned to look at Izuku and he didn't seem so normal anymore with the way rage was scrunching up his face and how those eyes filled with hatred that just pinned him to the ground from terror. "What the F did you do to my quirk, you effing brat?" The stranger yelled and was getting up to march over to him. Izuku was frozen to his spot both from being too afraid to move and because he couldn't move with how much his wrist and leg and everything hurt. The stranger was still yelling, demanding answers, but Izuku couldn't even answer him beyond stuttering because he was a stranger, and he was yelling at him, and the way he towered over him made him feel small, trapped, and afraid. He just wanted his daddy back. When the stranger reached down to grip the front of his shirt into a fist and shake him, there wasn't anything Izuku could do. He couldn't move. He couldn't speak. He couldn't fight. He was a 4-year-old facing an adult. He was injured and basically quirkless. All he had was his own quirk and the guy's quirk, and seeing how he couldn't use his quirk again and the guy's quirk was about movement and Izuku couldn't move, he had nothing. No way to defend himself. "Answer me, you fing idiot. What the F did you do? Give me my quirk back." Izuku was shaken more before he was dropped back to the ground. He screamed in pain when he landed on his already hurt wrist again. And then he yelped from pain again shortly after when there was a kick to his stomach. When the stranger's hands wrapped around his neck and started squeezing, he could barely even try to claw at them to get them off before the pain and exhaustion were setting in. He couldn't breathe and everything was turning black. "Papa, help me," he wanted to cry but no words could leave his throat. The world faded into darkness. Shoyuta made a pretty impressive drifting move with his car on the fly the second he heard Izuku's cry for help. He checked the street he was on now, and then started figuring out the quickest way to where Izuku was. He would get there in a matter of minutes. He was coming, Izuku. The brakes of the car screeched in agony as Shoyuta had to make an emergency stop as he hit a dead end. There was a wall on the end of the street cutting him off from the street he was trying to get to. Briefly, he considered just trying to go through it with his car, but that involved just way too many risks. Without hesitating, Shoyuta was out the car and running forward, using all his maneuverability and strength he had as a hero to parkour over the wall. The car was left behind, doors open and keys still in the startup lock. The scene Shoyuta saw after jumping over the fence made all rationality escape his mind. All he could see was a man a few hundred meters away, over a child, over Izuku, strangling him. The cry that broke out from his throat was desperate, afraid, furious, Izuku! Shoyuta had never run so fast as he was now, but even these few seconds could be it, could be too late. Izuku was already completely limp on the ground, not even fighting at all. There was 2 gunshots and the man above Izuku fell away. Shoyuta had eyes only for Izuku as he finally got to him. The image would seep into his brain for years to come in vivid, terrifying clarity. Izuku, unmoving and still, and so very, very white, like all the color had disappeared from his face white, leaving only blue lips and his freckles on colorless skin. He wasn't breathing. If Shoyuta was saying something, crying and begging for Izuku to be okay, to wake up, please be okay, he wasn't aware of it. At first, he frantically cupped Izuku's small head and then tried to find his pulse. It wasn't there. Izuku wasn't breathing, he had no pulse. He wasn't breathing. Shoyuta started CPR with 5 blows to Izuku's mouth, pulling his chin up and holding his nose so that the air would go to his lungs. He continued on to pressing Izuku's chest 30 times, barely keeping in mind just how much pressure he should be using. It had to be enough to be reviving Izuku, but not too much so he would break all his ribs. It was a mad, sickening rhythm of 2 blows of air to Izuku's mouth and 30 presses on Izuku's chest, everything else disappearing from around him. The only thing that mattered was Izuku. Shoyuta was pressing Izuku's chest once again, counting frantically in time with his pushes, 1 to 4, as he felt a hand on his shoulder. He activated his quirk at once and was ready to fight whoever was trying to stop him from giving CPR to Izuku when he saw Best Jeanist. Eraserhead, listen to me. The medics are here. Let them help him. The hero spoke to him, and at once all the sound and things around him that he had been blocking out came back. Shoyuta looked around dazedly at all the heroes and police officers and medics around him. In his moment of hesitation, someone else took over reviving Izuku, pressing his chest while a 3rd person came with a breathing bag and started steadily blowing air into Izuku's lungs with it. I need a defibrillator. The paramedic giving Izuku CPR called out. Izuku's shirt was cut off to attach the tags on Izuku's chest. Clear. The paramedic ordered, and everybody put their hands up to show they weren't touching Izuku as an electrical shock was used on him. Izuku's body jumped a bit off the ground from the force. There were a few seconds of silence as the paramedic felt for a pulse and Shoyuta felt like he couldn't breathe. Please, please, oh God, please. I have a pulse. Shoyuta choked as he breathed in relief. The paramedic was still shouting out orders, but Shoyuta felt like he could finally breathe. Izuku had a pulse. Izuku was breathing. Someone was gently pulling him away so that the paramedics could get to his spot to move Izuku onto a stretcher. A head collar was put around Izuku's neck and they were moving Izuku to the ambulance. Shoyuta followed. He climbed into the ambulance and took a seat beside Izuku. At the last couple of seconds before the ambulance's doors were shut, Shoyuta turned his head and saw a glimpse of blood on the pavement. Then the doors closed with a bang and the ambulance was moving only a few seconds later. Shoyuta felt weird, distant, out of focus. Something that had never happened to him before, really. He always had a clear mind even in the most stressful of situations, but right now everything was a mess and time seemed to slow down and speed up at random. At first it seemed like he was staring at Izuku's still body on the stretcher for forever, but then they arrived at the hospital and the drive there felt like it had lasted a second. Noises and sounds and their meanings seemed to come with a few seconds glitch in his brain. He saw someone before him, their lips moving, them talking to him, but all he could think was Izuku Zuku Zuku in an endless litany. They were taking him away and there was a hand on his chest, stopping him. Sir, please. Listen to me. We need to take care of the patient, but you can't come with us. I need to stay with him. I'm his father. Please. Shoyuta prayed and all his desperation seeped into his voice. I'm sorry, sir, but you can't. We will do everything we can to help your son, but you have to stay here. Please come this way here. You can sit down here. Okay, good, someone will come here to be with you in just a moment. We will take care of your son. He was left alone, and time didn't seem to matter anymore. The next thing Shoyuta knew was a familiar hand on his cheek and his gaze raised to see Hisashi. It took only a second for him to break down. He was in Hisashi's arms instantly and he held on desperately trying to find something to ground him back to existence. I was holding his hand. Hisashi was lost. Everything was just chaos and seemed unreal. Getting an alert that a child had been kidnapped? That child being Izuku? And he was so far away, and he had no idea what had happened and what to do. Namuri had been with him and tried to calm him down as panic instantly took hold. He was just about to calm down as a distant but still there yell traveled even to his ears. It was Izuku, crying for help. He was calling for him and he was so far away there was no way he could get there on time. And how strongly did Izuku have to yell for it to be able to actually travel all the way here? Easily several kilometers away. He was panicking so much that, honestly, Namuri was a lifesaver. She got him into a car's passenger seat and started driving wildly to the direction where Izuku should be. They never arrived there because during their trip, they got a call from the police that Izuku had been taken to a hospital and they instantly changed directions to there. When they arrived, he was directed to a private waiting room where Shoyuta was sitting with a nurse. He didn't seem to even know that she was there, that's how lost he looked, and he didn't even notice Hisashi until he was there, placing a hand on Shuta's cheek. The look on Shuta's face was something he had never seen before. It was so lost, so beaten and so out of character for Shoyuta that Hisashi was just shocked. He was frozen and terrified of what on earth could make Shoyuta look like this. He was afraid that he knew what it might be. But Shoyuta was always so strong, so collected. He could probably count the times he had seen Shoyuta cry with one hand, and it had never been anywhere close to this. Shoyuta broke down and then Hisashi was equally pulling Shoyuta to an embrace as Shoyuta was actually throwing himself into it, and he held on to Hisashi like he was drowning, and the way he was now crying, it really seemed like he was. I was holding his hand. Hisashi heard Shoyuta whisper and then he was sobbing again. And Hisashi was so lost, he didn't know what to do, what to say, and so all he could do in the end was hold on Shoyuta, to comfort him and to comfort himself as tears started falling from his eyes as well. How could this be happening? It took so long for them to hear anything that eventually they just ran out of tears or were just too exhausted to cry anymore but too stubborn to rest. Shoyuta started demanding for answers from a nurse at some point, almost seeming like he would get physical before Hisashi rested a hand on his shoulder and pulled him to sit beside him once again. Shoyuta looked like he might crack again and start crying, but this time he refused and hid his eyes from view with his hand. It took another agonizing 42 minutes for anyone to come in, then finally a doctor did. She was a nice-looking dark-skinned female doctor. She still had a scrub hat on as she walked in. "It is to my understanding that you are Izuku's parents?" she asked at first. Shoyuta was up in a moment and rushing closer to the doctor together with Hisashi. Yes, we are. How is he? Is Izuku okay? Your son is stable and in the pediatric ICU, the doctor started, and Hisashi couldn't stifle a quiet relieved sob. Unfortunately, he is currently under anesthesia because there's some heavy bruising and swelling around his throat, and we had to intubate him to make sure that his breathing would stay intact. We did some scans and it turned out that Izuku had some internal bleeding, a twisted ankle, and a fractured wrist. We had to operate to make sure the bleeding wouldn't cause problems, and his ankle and wrist have been casted. Right now, we want to keep him for observation for the night and see if we can lift the anesthesia after the night. Can we see him? Hisashi asked. Yes, you are family, so you're allowed to see him in the ICU. Come this way, the doctor agreed. They were led through the hospital into the intensive care unit. The doctor opened the hallway door there with her pass. They passed several other patients' rooms on their way there. Each patient, each child patient, had a big glass window into their rooms so everyone who walked past could see inside. When they finally reached Izuku's room and saw him through that window, Hisashi had to lift his hand to his lips to stifle a sob. Oh my God! Izuku looked so small lying in that bed. He had always heard that it felt horrible to see a loved one in the hospital because they were connected to so many. tubes and wires and machines, but it felt so much different seeing it yourself when it was your loved one. Not just a loved one, when it was your son, your child. It felt wrong. They were let in, and at the same time it felt like they needed to rush to Izuku and approach very carefully. They did, each one of them taking a side to Izuku's bed. "See, can we touch him?" Hizashi forced out, even though it felt like he wasn't getting enough air to even breathe. "Yes, you can. It would be best to make sure your hands are clean and make sure that you don't pull out any of the things attached to him," the doctor explained. Hizashi nodded, his gaze following Izuku's body, taking note of all the things attached to Izuku. How there was a huge plastic tube coming out of his mouth. A big bandage on his shin. How there were IVs on his hand and wires attached to his chest that led, for example, to the heart monitor that was steadily beating out Izuku's heartbeat. Hizashi felt relief seeing that, but it was short-lived when turning back to look at Izuku brought back all the desperation and anguish. Uncertainly, Hizashi was about to pull out a chair so he could sit by Izuku's bed when he finally noticed Shoyuta. He was standing there, beside Izuku, looking absolutely stabbed with grief, unmoving. Hizashi walked over so he could pull a chair for Shoyuta and gently guide him to sit down. He even gently guided Shuta's hand to take one of Izuku's hands to hold. "Shoyuta, he's alive. Izuku is alive and he's going to be okay," Hizashi whispered and hugged Shoyuta from behind, keeping his eyes on Izuku's still body. "I was holding his hand when they took him. I was right there, and I couldn't." Shuta's breath hitched, and he couldn't go on any longer. Hizashi was almost too afraid to ask, not wanting to upset Shoyuta any more than necessary, but he felt like he had to. "What happened? How did—" Now it was Hizashi who couldn't go on. He buried his face into Shuta's neck and breathed deeply, trying to find comfort. "How could this happen? I don't know. I don't know who took him or what even happened to him. There was a man strangling Izuku when I finally got there, and then I got to Izuku and I couldn't focus on anything else. I just had to make sure Izuku was alright," Shoyuta whispered, and he sounded so broken that it just broke Hizashi's heart. "We will get through this. We will get all the answers later. We will." They were allowed to stay there. At one point a nurse tried to gently encourage them to go home and rest, but they weren't forced to leave, and they refused to do so. An extra bed was brought into the room so they could rest there if they wanted, but neither of them were ready to let go of Izuku to do so. At some point Hizashi couldn't fight the exhaustion anymore, and he found himself falling asleep, resting his head on the edge of Izuku's bed. The next time he woke up, the room was bright again and morning light was filling up the room from the window. Hizashi woke up with a startle and hurriedly turned his head this way and that, taking in his surroundings, until finally landing onto Shoyuta. He looked horrible. He looked exhausted and miserable. He was still sitting on the chair and holding Izuku's hand, refusing to move his gaze away from him. Did you sleep at all?" Hizashi asked carefully. For a moment he wasn't sure if Shoyuta had even heard him or whether he just wasn't going to answer, but then he gave a small shake of his head. Hizashi sighed and rubbed at his tired eyes, rolling his stiff shoulders. "You should," he tried gently. "Izuku wouldn't want you to not take care of yourself. Izuku wanted me to protect him, and I failed at that too." Hizashi swallowed, the painful grip around his heart squeezing harder, trying to find words to say to Shoyuta. "Izuku wouldn't want you to blame yourself either," he finally said. Because it was true. If there was anything he knew about his son, it was that Izuku loved them almost too much and could never find any fault in either of them. Izuku would feel horrible himself if he saw how Shoyuta was right now. Shoyuta never answered back to Hizashi, and the painful feeling increased. Hizashi decided to get up and go get some food and water for them. The atmosphere in the room was bad. If Shoyuta was unable to take care of himself now, then Hizashi must be the one to take care of both of them, for Izuku's sake at least. He had heard that losing a child could break up couples. Izuku was currently stable, but Hizashi could still understand now how that could happen. There was a vending machine in the hall, fortunately not too far from Izuku's room since Hizashi didn't want to go far. He bought a few water bottles and some snack bars. Not the best meal, but it was something at least. "Shoyuta," Hizashi said gently as he returned. He softly stroked his hand through Shuta's hair and leaned down to kiss him gently on the temple. "Please eat this and drink some water. I don't want you to drop down from dehydration. Hizashi let his hand linger for a moment before pulling away and moving to the other side of the bed. He watched on as Shoyuta stared at the items placed into his hands for a moment before sighing and uncapping the water bottle, raising it to his lips to take a sip. The room was filled with silence. The tone in the room so heavy that there wasn't much to say. Meaningless small talk just wouldn't work, and even Hizashi didn't want to do it. Asking questions seemed pointless because there weren't many things that could be answered. And Shoyuta looked so tense, so pained that Hizashi was just left speechless. 23 minutes passed in silence as they just sat there staring at Izuku, staring at the steadily beating heart monitor, gently holding Izuku's hand, hoping, praying for him to just be okay. As the clock reached 7 a.m., the doctor finally came back. "Good morning, gentlemen," she greeted politely and calmly. There wasn't much joy in the doctor's voice either. "I see you decided to stay past the night. A usual occurrence really, but I want to remind you to take care of yourselves too. You're not helping Izuku in any way by running yourselves to the ground. Izuku wants to wake up to both his parents rested and healthy." Shoyuta was tense and didn't respond. Hizashi gave a tense smile and a nod to the doctor. "I'm here to check Izuku's vitals and see if we can remove the intubation tube," she explained as she approached Izuku's bed. "Yes, of course," Hizashi agreed. Shoyuta followed the doctor with his sharp gaze as she went over, reading Izuku's chart and the reading on the monitors. She opened up Izuku's patient gown so she could listen to his chest with a stethoscope and give a hands-on examination of Izuku's abdomen. To Izuku's parents' shock, it revealed the cuts and bruises that had been sealed with white medical bandages. Seeing the big and dark bruises on Izuku's neck more clearly made Hizashi feel nauseous. The doctor wrote something on Izuku's electric chart on her tablet and then smiled at them. "I'm happy to tell you that Izuku seems to be recovering well. The swelling around his throat has come down and there's no alarming signs on his abdomen. I feel comfortable removing the intubation and anesthesia and see if Izuku would wake up soon. Then we can see how he's responding and take a few more scans to make sure everything is okay." "Oh, thank God," Hizashi whispered and bowed his head. "There are police officers outside that want to talk to you too. They are requesting for you to go meet them. They are waiting for you at the lobby, past the entrance to the ICU." "Oh, Hizashi hesitated, looking back to Izuku, his instincts screaming at him not to leave Izuku. "I assure you, I will stay with Izuku the whole time and make sure he's okay. You can come back as soon as you're done, but I'm afraid I must insist for you to go." Hizashi didn't want to leave Izuku. Rationally, he knew that Izuku should be safe here in the hospital. Izuku was stable and nothing bad was going to get to him here, but after what had happened, Hizashi desperately just wanted to watch over Izuku. To Hizashi's surprise though, Shoyuta didn't hesitate for long. He saw how he was first staring at Izuku, then an angry scowl took over his features and suddenly Shoyuta was up, moving so violently that the chair almost fell over. "Shoyuta?" Hizashi tried, but he was already storming out and Hizashi was helpless to stop him. He glanced once at the doctor again and she gave him a reassuring smile, and so he rushed to catch up to Shoyuta, who was speed walking with long strides towards the exit. Hizashi managed to get through the doors before they closed after Shoyuta, who had basically thrown them open, and was just about to reach Shoyuta when he reached the police officers waiting for them. To be more specific, Tsuragami Kenji, the chief of the police force, and Tsukachi Naomasa, the police detective they had met when they went over to talk about Izuku's quirk. What was that? Less than a week ago? It seemed like forever. "Who did this?" Shoyuta shouted. "Where are they?" "Aizawa, please, calm down," the chief ordered, putting up a hand in a placating manner. He glanced this way and that, taking in the other people around them. "Let's speak in private." Shoyuta was possibly fuming. He looked like he was about to protest, but the chief led them to a private room not far away and closed the door behind them, closing the blinds on the windows. "I want to know what happened. Where is the guy who took Izuku? I want to see him," Shoyuta demanded. "You can't," Tsuragami answered sternly. "He tried to strangle my son. He almost killed him." Shoyuta roared and looked like he wanted to punch something. "He's dead." Shoyuta froze on the spot and stared at Tsuragami in disbelief and shock. "What?" He died from 2 gunshot wounds to the chest. When the hero Snipe reached the scene, he saw the attacker strangling Izuku. Exercising his judgment, Snipe decided to fire 2 gunshots to get him off your son. He possibly saved your son, but the attacker died at the scene. Shoyuta was shaking his head and then started pulling at his hair. He can't be dead. He can't be. He is. Who is he? What did he want? Why did he take Izuku? How did he find Izuku? Shoyuta demanded. Tsuragami sighed and rubbed at his forehead, glancing at the detective who had remained quiet until now. Standing a bit off with his arms crossed. We don't know, Detective Tsukachi said with resignation. What? How can you not know? We have tried to identify the man that tried to kidnap Izuku. Unfortunately, both his fingerprints and face recognition came back empty. It seems like that officially this man can't be found from any records, like he doesn't even exist. We have no idea who he was, and therefore we have no idea why he targeted Izuku. Since he's dead, we can't even interrogate him. Shoyuta was running his fingers through his hair desperately before he grabbed a chair from the meeting table in the room and threw it with all his strength at the wall with an angry curse, F-. There was no stopping Shoyuta as he once again stormed out of the room, even though both Tsuragami and Tsukachi tried to stop him from leaving, trying to appeal for their need to get an interview from him, but it all fell to deaf ears. I'm sorry, I don't think I can be any use to you. I wasn't there, Hizashi expressed in regret as he was starting to head for the door. I need to make sure Shoyuta is okay. Hizashi hurriedly rushed behind Shoyuta once again, and this time couldn't reach him until they were back at Izuku's room. Shoyuta was back there, sitting beside Izuku's bed, holding Izuku's hand as his face was buried in the crook of his arm on Izuku's bed, his shoulders shaking slightly but no sound escaping him. Hizashi rushed to him, pulling a chair next to his and hugging Shoyuta from his side. We will get through this, Shoyuta, I promise. Next followed a tense PRD of time as they once again sat by Izuku's bed. Izuku wasn't intubated anymore, but he had a breathing mask over his mouth now. They had lifted off the anesthesia and some of the painkillers so that Izuku would, hopefully, wake up soon. The doctors assured them that he would, but it had been a while now and fear was starting to claw at Shuta's heart that he wouldn't. What had happened to Izuku was unforgivable. Traumatic. He had received severe injuries. He had been strangled. There was no sure way to tell how that may have affected Izuku's mind before he woke up. If he woke up, Shoyuta felt horrible and he couldn't stop crying. And he hated it. He hated how Izuku had been kidnapped from him while he was holding his hand. He hated how long it had taken him to get to Izuku. He hated that he hadn't been able to do anything but focus on Izuku. He hated that he knew that had been the only option. Izuku would be dead now if he hadn't, but he hated that now the man that had attacked Izuku was dead, and he couldn't strangle the monster himself. Couldn't demand answers from him. Couldn't know why this had happened. It all seemed so wrong, and all he could do was keep praying. Praying that Izuku would be okay. Praying that Izuku would wake up. Praying that they would get some answers and make sure that this wouldn't happen ever again. Shoyuta was still holding Izuku's hand, Hizashi's hand on top of his, when all of a sudden he felt a twitch and his gaze snapped up to Izuku immediately. Izuku's eyelashes were starting to flutter, and with bated breath Shoyuta watched on as Izuku started blinking his eyes open. Unfocused and confused. Izuku, he breathed out in a relieved whisper, his hand coming up to gently cup Izuku's head where he didn't disturb the breathing mask over Izuku's mouth. Izuku was blinking more and more, his eyes turning to try and take in his surroundings, the heart monitor telling them that Izuku's heartbeat was getting a little faster. Izuku, it's okay. I'm here, okay? You're okay. Daddy's here. Shoyuta tried to soothe as Izuku's green eyes finally found his eyes, staying there confused and afraid. You're safe, okay? You are in a hospital. There was an attack, but you're safe now. You are here with me and Papa. It's okay, Izuku, we are here, he suddenly heard from his side, and he hurriedly glanced at Hizashi, who was now on the other side of the bed, gently holding Izuku's other hand. Izuku's eyes moved towards the sound and to Hizashi, popping back and forth between his two fathers. Izuku's hand twitched in his hold and Shoyuta realized that it was trying to get free, and so Shoyuta reluctantly let go of Izuku's hand as it started reaching up, coming to the breathing mask over his face. No, Izuku. Don't take the breathing mask off. It's helping you breathe. The doctor will be here soon, don't worry. Hisashi soothed Izuku and softly stroked Izuku's hair, and Izuku gave a small nod. Just then in came the doctor and he walked over to Izuku, giving him a gentle smile, and Shoyuta reluctantly stepped out of the way even though he desperately wanted to stay as close to Izuku as possible. Hey there, strong guy, the doctor greeted in a comforting tone. You have been recovering really well after what happened. I'm going to remove the mask now and place the string over your nose instead, okay? Oxygen flows through it and it's going to help you breathe. Is it okay that I do this? The doctor asked gently, showing Izuku the see-through tube. Izuku gave a small nod. The doctor removed the oxygen mask gently and then placed the tube in its stead. It went behind Izuku's ears and below his nose, connecting back together in a loop over Izuku's chest, providing oxygen for Izuku but leaving his mouth free. Daddy. Papa, Izuku whispered with a quiet and weak voice and looked to his two fathers with glimmering eyes. The doctor stepped away once again as Shoyuta rushed to be at Izuku's side once again. We are right here. It's okay, Izuku, Shoyuta assured. Izuku gave a small sniff, and he leaned his cheek against Shuta's hand as it gently cupped his cheek, closing his eyes. Shoyuta leaned in to bury his face into Izuku's soft curly hair as relieved sobs took over. Izuku was okay.